Hey guys, tonight we are winding the clock way back. Not to a grand palace or a famous battlefield, but to a place you might find a little prickly. We're journeying to the world of medieval medicine, a time when your local surgeon was probably also your barber, and the most advanced medical diagram looked like a poster for a horror movie. Honestly, if we were to drop you there for real, you probably wouldn't make it through the first day without some kind of unfortunate incident. This journey is all about understanding why that was the case, through the eyes of one of the strangest and most fascinating artifacts in medical history, the Wound Man. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where our little history club gathers from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you isn't a sight, but a smell. It's a dense, complex bouquet of damp earth, wet straw, wood smoke, animal manure, and something vaguely sour that you'd rather not identify. You open your eyes, and the world is painted in shades of brown and grey. You're standing in what appears to be a narrow, paved street, flanked on both sides by timber-framed houses that lean towards each other, their upper floors jutting out so far they almost kiss, casting the ground below in a perpetual twilight. You take a hesitant step, and your foot sinks slightly into the soft, muddy ground. You quickly pull it back. That deep rut in the middle of the street. It's not a design feature, it's an open sewer. This street is a multi-purpose marvel of inefficiency. It's a road, a garbage dump, and a toilet, all rolled into one. Scraps of old food, animal bones, and other less savory things are scattered about, half rodden into the mud. A pig, snorting unsurprisingly large, darts out from an alley, nearly taking you out at the knees before disappearing into another doorway. You see, keeping livestock in the city was common, and pigs running loose were such a problem that many towns had specific laws against it, a niche, but surprisingly persistent little piece of medieval public administration. This is your world now. A world without reinforced concrete, safety regulations, or antibacterial soap. A world where every single day is a small obstacle course of potential injuries. Look at that man over there, a carpenter, hewing a massive timber beam with a broad axe. There's no safety cone, no hard hat, just skill and a prayer separating his shin from a life-altering injury. Over by the forge, the blacksmith's apprentice is hauling glowing metal with a pair of tongs. A single misstep on the slick floor could mean a horrific burn. Even the simple act of walking home at night, on these uneven, unlit streets, is a gamble. A twisted ankle is a best-case scenario. A fall resulting in a broken bone or a concussion is a very real possibility. And it's not just the accidents. Violence is a casual part of the background rhythm. A heated argument in the tavern next door spills out onto the street. You see two men shouting, red-faced. Before one shows the other hard, the man stumbles backwards, trips over a loose cobblestone, and his head hits the wall with a sickening thud. He slides to the ground, groaning. Nobody seems particularly shocked. A small crowd gathers, but no one calls for an ambulance. Now, it's easy to paint this entire era with one muddy brush, but historians just how uniformly grim daily life was. Some towns were better managed than others, with rudimentary public health rules and street cleaning guilds that tried their best to keep the main thoroughfares clear. But the overarching truth remains: the baseline for safe and clean was worlds away from ours. The potential for injury was woven into the very fabric of existence. A cut from a dirty knife while preparing dinner, a kick from a horse while trying to cross the road, a fall from a rickety ladder. These weren't dramatic, once-in-a-lifetime events. They were the mundane, ever-present risks of just being alive. This constant, low-level hum of physical danger is the single most important thing to understand about this time. It's why people were so preoccupied with the fragility of the body. It's why a person who knew how to set a bone, stitch a wound, or pull a rotten tooth was one of the most essential and sometimes feared figures in any community. As you stand there, taking in this chaotic, hazardous, yet strangely vibrant scene, you hear a shout from above. You look up and see workers on the wooden scaffolding of a new building. One of them loses his grip on a hammer. It tumbles end over end, catching the light for a moment before landing with a dull crack on the shoulder of a merchant haggling below. The man cries out in pain, clutching his arm. A cry goes up from the crowd, a call for help. But they aren't shouting for a doctor, not in the way you and I think of one. They're calling for the barber. And that's where your story truly begins. The call for the barber slices through the general hum of the street. It's not a request for a quick trim and a shave, it's a cry of urgency. The crowd instinctively parts, creating a path, and you find yourself swept along by a tide of morbid curiosity. You're all heading towards a shop just a few doors down, one distinguished by a curious pole outside. It's painted with twisting red and white stripes, like a giant candy cane. You've seen them before, but never paid them much mind. You're about to learn what it really means. This is the domain of the barber-surgeon. You hesitate at the doorway, peering into the gloom. The interior is a stark contrast to the chaotic street. It's cleaner, for one, and far more organized. The air, however, is thick with a smell you can't quite place. It's a strange cocktail of pungent herbs. Sharp vinegar, the coppery tang of old blood, and something that smells faintly like soap. Along one wall are shelves lined with earthenware jars, glass bottles filled with murky liquids, and dried bundles of plants hanging from the rafters. You can see leeches swimming lazily in a large jar on a countertop. On the other wall, neatly arranged on hooks, is an array of gleaming metal tools. Some look familiar, like razors and scissors. Others look more like they belong in a carpenter's workshop or a torture chamber. The injured merchant is now sitting on a low, sturdy stool in the center of the room, his face pale with pain. Standing over him is the master of this establishment, a man of about 50, with a stern face and deep-set eyes that seem to miss nothing. His sleeves are rolled up, revealing surprisingly strong forearms covered in weary hair. He moves with a calm, practiced efficiency that commands the room. He is the barber-surgeon. He probes the merchant's shoulder with deft, surprisingly gentle fingers, his expression unreadable. The merchant winces and lets out a sharp gasp. A clean break in the clavicle, the surgeon announces, his voice a low rumble. "We are fortunate. It has not pierced the skin." He turns and his eyes land on you, lingering in the doorway. You're not gawking like the others, you're watching his hands, a flicker of fascination overriding your revulsion. He seems to notice. "You," he barks, gesturing with his head. "Don't just stand there blocking the light. In or out?" You flinch, but find yourself stepping inside. "Make yourself useful. Fetch that basin and hold it." He points to a simple wooden basin. As you hold the basin, you watch him work. He has the merchant's uninjured arm slung over an assistant's shoulder for leverage. He places one hand firmly on the man's chest and the other on the broken collarbone. He murmurs something to the merchant, too low for you to hear. Then, with a sudden, decisive movement, he pulls and twists. There's a sickening popper sound of grinding bone that seems to echo in the small room. The merchant lets out a muffled scream, his knuckles white where he grips the stool, but just as quickly it's over. The surgeon is already preparing a splint and bandages. This is your introduction to the trade. The barber-surgeons were the workhorses of medieval healthcare. While the university-trained physicians in their long robes were debating theories and examining urine, these were the men who got their hands dirty. They were the ones who handled the everyday carnage of medieval life, setting bones, stitching wounds, pulling teeth, lancing boils, and of course bloodletting. And yes, they would also give you a shave and a haircut. That iconic red and white pole, it's a direct advertisement for their most common procedure. The pole represents the staff a patient would grip to make their veins bulge. The red stripe is the blood, the white is the bandage. It's one of the most direct and, frankly, unnerving pieces of branding in history. The social standing and training of these men is a topic historians still argue about. Were they respected craftsmen or uneducated butchers? The truth, as usual, is somewhere in the middle. In some cities, they belonged to powerful guilds with formal apprenticeships and rigorous for-the-time examinations. In more rural areas, a man might become a surgeon simply by being the son of one, learning the trade through observation. They were a world apart from the elite physicians, who often looked down on them for performing manual labor, yet they were undeniably essential. The surgeon finishes bandaging the merchant's shoulder, immobilizing it against his chest. He gives the man a small cup of wine mixed with some herbal concoction to dull the pain. The merchant, looking immensely relieved, pays the surgeon a few coins, thanks him profusely, and is helped out of the shop by his friends. The surgeon wipes his hands on a cloth, the first hint of weariness showing on his face. He turns to you. You're still standing there, holding the basin, your mind racing. You didn't faint, you didn't look away, and you did as you were told. He studies you for a long moment. You have a strong stomach, he says. It's not a question. I need a new apprentice. My last one decided he was better suited to shearing sheep. The work is hard, the hours are long, and you will see things that will curdle your dreams. But you will learn a skill that matters. He gestures around the room at the tools, the herbs, the lingering scent of pain and relief. The pay is a roof over your head, food in your belly, and a trade. Are you interested? You look from his stern face to the tools on the wall, to the dark stain on the floor where the merchant had been sitting. This is the shadow world of healing, a place of blood and bone and desperate hope. And it's calling to you. You accept. You accept. The alternative is a life of back-breaking, anonymous labor in the fields or the muck-filled streets. Here, in this strange, shadowed room, lies the promise of knowledge, of a respected trade, of becoming someone who can stand between a person and the abyss. Your new master, a man named Master Elric, grunts in what you assume is approval. He doesn't smile. You get the feeling he rarely does. Your apprenticeship begins not with a scalpel, but with a broom. For weeks, your life is a blur of scrubbing floors, cleaning tools until they gleam, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle until your arms ache, and running errands through the labyrinthine city streets. You learn the names of 100 different plants, the precise way to fold a bandage, and how to hold a basin for a bloodletting without spilling a single drop. It's tedious, exhausting work, but you are a sponge, soaking in every detail. You watch every procedure, listen to every diagnosis, and try to commit the grim anatomy of injuries to memory. One rainy afternoon, when the shop is quiet, Master Elric decides it's time for your first real lesson. He doesn't pull out a medical text filled with dense Latin prose. The physicians might have their Avicenna and Galen, but for a practical man like him, that's all just theory. He needs you to understand the reality of the work. He walks over to a large wooden chest in the corner, one you've always been curious about. He unlocks it with a heavy iron key and lifts the lid. From it, he carefully pulls out a large, rolled-up sheet of vellum, yellowed with age. He unfurls it on the main work table, weighting the corners down with small stones. And you see it for the first time. You stare, completely transfixed. It is horrifying and fascinating. It's a drawing of a man, standing passively, almost stoically, staring directly out at you. But his body is a catalogue of disasters. A dagger is plunged into his shoulder. A sword pierces his side. An axe is embedded in his thigh. An arrow protrudes from his knee, while another sticks out of his chest. His arms and legs are covered in cuts and slashes of varying depths. A club or mace is clearly connected with his head, leaving a bloody wound. A bee or wasp stings his cheek, a dog bites his calf, and a venomous snake coils around his ankle, its fangs sunk into his flesh. One of his eyes is wounded, and even his internal organs seem to be afflicted, hinted at by colored lines. It is every possible injury a person could conceivably suffer, all depicted happening at once to a single unfortunate soul. This Master Elric says, his voice low and reverent, is the wound man. For Vulneratus he is our map, our index, our silent teacher. You can't tear your eyes away. It's grotesque, yet there's an undeniable logic to it. It's like an all-in-one infographic from a nightmare. Master Elric taps the dagger in the shoulder. A knight falls an attorney. This is the wound. What do? You pull it straight out or twist it? He moves his finger to the arrow in the chest. A crossbow bolt from a siege. It has barbs. Pull it out the wrong way, and you'll tear the lung to pieces. What is your method? He points to the snake bite. A farmer is bitten in the fields. How do you stop the poison? Do you cut? Do you suck? Do you burn? He explains that this single image serves as a visual table of contents for the surgical texts that often accompanied it. Each wound on the man would be numbered or have a line pointing to a paragraph in the margins, which would then describe the recommended treatment for that specific injury. It was a quick reference guide, a medieval search engine for trauma. In the heat of the moment, when a bleeding soldier or a mauled peasant was brought to you, you didn't have time to flip through a dense book. You could glance at the wound man, find the corresponding injury, and immediately access the necessary information. This strange, morbid diagram was incredibly popular from the 14th century all the way into the 17th. It wasn't just one drawing, it was a concept, reproduced and modified in countless medical manuscripts across Europe. Some versions are cruder, some more artistically rendered, but the core idea remains the same: a single, comprehensive visual guide to the brutal reality of physical trauma. Historians today see it as a powerful symbol of the pre-modern world's relationship with violence and injury. It wasn't an abstract concept, it was an immediate, ever-present threat that needed a practical visual solution. You learn a weird little detail: the placement of the weapons wasn't always random. Some scholars argue that in certain German manuscripts, the weapons were deliberately placed to correspond with the regions of the Holy Roman Empire they were most associated with. A Bohemian pole axe here, a Swiss dagger there. It was a kind of morbid geopolitical map laid over a human body, a detail lost on most but fascinating to diagrams. Master Elric rolls the vellum back up with immense care. He shows you everything that can go wrong, he says, his gaze distant. He reminds you that the body is fragile, a parchment that can be cut, torn, and pierced. Our job is to learn how to mend that parchment. But before you can learn to mend, he adds, turning his piercing gaze back to you, you must first understand the ink. You must understand the humors. He taps his own chest. The very fluids that give us life, and in their imbalance, bring us death. Your real lessons start tomorrow with the 4 humors. You nod, your mind still reeling from the image of the wound man. That stoic, mutilated figure is now burned into your memory. It's a promise of the knowledge to come, and a terrifying preview of the final exam. The next morning, the lesson on the 4 humors begins not with a lecture, but with a taste test. Master Elric hands you a slice of apple. It's crisp and cool. Cold and moist, he declares. Then he gives you a pinch of black pepper on a piece of bread. You chew, and a fiery heat spreads through your mouth. Hot and dry, he says with a nod. This, he explains, is the foundation of everything. The entire universe, from the stars in the sky to the worm in the earth, is composed of 4 basic qualities: hot, cold, moist, and dry, and within the human body, these qualities manifest as 4 vital fluids, the humors. He unrolls a simple chart, far less dramatic than the wound man, but in his world, far more important. It shows a man in the center, with lines connecting him to 4 substances, 4 organs, 4 seasons, and 4 temperaments. Everything is connected, he says, tapping the chart. Understand this, and you understand health. First, there is blood. Produced by the liver, it is hot and moist, like the air of springtime. A person with a healthy abundance of blood is sanguine, that is, cheerful, optimistic, and rosy-cheeked. Too much blood, however, could lead to fevers, mania, or nosebleed. This, you realize, is the entire justification for bloodletting. The logic is simple. If you have too much of a hot and moist fluid, you just need to remove some. Next is phlegm. Associated with the brain and lungs, it is cold and moist, like the water of winter. A person dominated by phlegm is phlegmatic, cold, slow, and perhaps a bit lazy or dull. An excess of phlegm might cause a runny nose, a cough, or general lethargy. The treatment: things that are hot and dry. A spicy soup. A warm fire, certain herbs that were believed to burn away the excess moisture. Then comes yellow bile, or choler. Produced by the gallbladder, it is hot and dry, like the fire of summer. This is the humor of anger and ambition. A choleric person is a leader, fiery, energetic, and easily angered. An excess of yellow bile was thought to cause jaundice, indigestion, and fits of rage. To counteract this, you'd be prescribed cooling and moistening things, perhaps a diet of cucumbers and melons, or a nice, relaxing bath. Finally, there is black bile or melancholy. Linked to the spleen, it is cold and dry like the earth of autumn. This is the humor of sadness and introspection. A melancholic person is thoughtful, artistic, and prone to depression. An overabundance of black bile was blamed for everything from constipation to deep soul-crushing despair. The treatments were often geared towards warming and moistening the body and spirit with warm foods, gentle music, and pleasant company. This theory was some medieval invention. Master Elric explains that it's ancient wisdom, passed down from the great physicians of Greece, like Hippocrates and Galen. For over 1,000 years, this has been the bedrock of Western medicine. It's elegant, it's symmetrical, and it makes a certain kind of intuitive sense. Got a fever, you're either hot. Let's cool you down. Feeling sluggish and damp, you're either cold and moist. Let's dry you out. Health was seen as a state of perfect balance between these four fluids. Sickness was simply the result of one of them becoming too dominant. Your job as a future surgeon is to be a kind of gardener of the body, pruning and watering as needed to restore that delicate equilibrium. Every food, every activity, and even every emotion had its own humoral properties. A good physician or surgeon needed to be a master of this complex system of correspondences. Here's a quirky little detail that showcases how deeply this thinking penetrated the culture. Even the food was designed around it. You might have heard of a dish called blancmange, which today is a kind of sweet, milky pudding. But in the Middle Ages, it was considered a perfect health food, especially for the sick. It was typically made of chicken or fish, milk or almond milk, rice, and sugar, all ingredients considered to be neutral or moist and warm, making them ideal for restoring balance in a sick person without overwhelming their system. It was medicine you could eat. Of course, this entire framework, which dominated medicine for well over 1,500 years, is almost completely wrong. The body isn't a container for mystical fluids, but to Master Elric, and to every other medical practitioner of his time, this is science. This is the fundamental truth of the human body. To question it would be like questioning gravity. However, even in this era there was room for debate. Historians point out that while the core theory was universally accepted, its practical application was endlessly debated. One doctor might argue a certain herb was hot in the first degree, while another would insist it was hot in the second degree, leading to different prescriptions. They argued fiercely over the best vein to open for a headache versus a toothache. The arguments weren't about whether the humors existed, but about the nitty-gritty details of how best to manipulate them. Master Elric finishes his lecture by pointing back to the door. Every person who walks through that door is a unique landscape of these for humors, he says. A wound from a sword doesn't just cut the flesh, it can shock the system, creating an excess of cold, black bile, leading to despair. A fever that follows an injury isn't just a fever, it's a sign of the blood boiling, becoming corrupted. You cannot hope to treat the wound if you do not also treat the man. You nod, trying to absorb the sheer, beautiful, and utterly flawed logic of it all. You are learning to see the world not just as a collection of objects, but as a dynamic interplay of hot, cold, moist, and dry. Your medical journey has begun, and your view of the human body will never be the same. A few months into your apprenticeship, the theoretical becomes terrifyingly real. It happens on a crisp autumn afternoon. The rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer down the street is shattered by a sudden, high-pitched scream of pain, followed by panicked shouting. Moments later, two men burst into the shop, half carrying a third. It's the blacksmith's young apprentice, a boy no older than 16. His face is as white as a sheet, and his teeth are gritted in a silent, agonizing grimace. Embedded deep in his left thigh, just above the knee, is a crossbow bolt. Master Elric is instantly in motion. On the table now, he commands. The men heave the boy onto the sturdy wooden operating table. Elric's eyes are already assessing the wound, his hands hovering over it. He doesn't touch it yet. He's looking at the angle, the depth, the type of bolt. A hunting quarrel, he murmurs, more to himself than to anyone else. Barbed. He turns to you, and your heart leaps into your throat. You You've been watching. You've seen the wound, man. You know this injury. He gestures to the boy's leg, and in your mind's eye, you see it the stoic figure on the venom chart, an arrow sticking out of his leg in almost the exact same spot. Tell me the danger. Your mind races, trying to recall the lessons the muttered comment Elric has made over previous, less critical injuries. The barbs, master, you stammer, your voice thin. If you pull it straight out, the barbs will catch on the flesh and muscle, tearing everything on the way back. It will make the wound 100 times worse. A flicker of approval in his eyes. Good. So we do not pull. He moves to his tool cabinet and selects a long, thin knife with a razor-sharp tip. He also takes out a strange-looking hollow cannula, a metal tube, slightly wider than the shaft of the bolt. There are 2 paths for this arrow, he says, speaking calmly, both for your benefit and to soothe the terrified boy. Out the way it came, all through. He explains the standard procedure, one that has been passed down through surgical manuals for generations. The first and preferred method, if the arrowhead isn't too deep, is to carefully cut down into the flesh, following the shaft of the arrow. The surgeon's goal is to expose the barbed head. Once it's visible, he can either try to maneuver the barbs to retract them or, more drastically, snip them off with a special tool before backing the shaft out. Bloody business that requires a steady hand and nerves of steel. The second method is even more brutal. If the bolt has gone deep or is in a fleshy part of the body like the thigh, the surgeon might opt to push it all the way through until the head emerges from the other side. He would then snip off the arrowhead and pull the clean shaft back out the way it came. It's a horrifying thought, creating a second wound to treat the first, but sometimes it was considered the lesser of two evils. Elric decides the bolt isn't deep enough to push through. Hold him, he instructs the 2 men. And you, he says, looking at you, hold his leg. Keep it steady, no matter what. You take the boy's leg in your hands. It's surprisingly heavy, the muscles tense as a board. The boy is shaking, sweat beading on his forehead. Elric gives him a leather strap to bite down on. There is no anesthetic, save for a quick swig of potent, cheap wine, which will do little more than make the boy dizzy. Elric begins. He works with a focused intensity that seems to suck all the air out of the room. He makes a swift, precise incision next to the arrow's entry point. The boy screams into the leather strap, his whole body arching in agony. You flinch but hold on tight. Your knuckles white. Blood wells up, dark and rich. Elric ignores it, his eyes fixed on his work. He uses the knife and a pair of forceps to delicately part the muscle tissue, probing, searching. This is a good time to mention a truly bizarre piece of battlefield medical advice from the period. Some surgical texts recommended a special ointment to help extract arrows. The secret ingredient, a dead mouse, cooked in oil with earthworms and other unsavory things. The belief was that this concoction would magically cause the arrowhead to loosen and fall out on its own. It's a perfect example of the blend of practical knowledge and pure magical thinking that defined medieval medicine. Master Elric is a man of practicality, not mouse-based ointments. The debate among surgeons about the best way to remove an arrow was fierce and has been a topic of study for medical historians. Guy de Chauliac, one of the most famous surgeons of the 14th century, dedicated entire chapters to it, detailing various extractors and techniques. He even described a method using a string looped around the barbs to guide them out cleanly, a remarkably sophisticated idea. However, the knowledge and tools available to a city surgeon like Elric were often more limited. After what feels like an eternity, Elric lets out a small grunt of success. He has exposed the arrowhead. He skillfully slits a pair of cutting pliers into the wound. There is a sharp snap of metal on metal. He has snipped off the barbs. Then, with a smooth, steady motion, he pulls the now barbed shaft out of the boy's thigh. It comes free with a sickening, wet sound. The worst is over. Now the real work of healing begins. Elric cleans the wound, not with an antiseptic, the concept is centuries away, but with wine, which, due to its alcohol content, was actually one of the more effective if accidental disinfectants they had. He packs the wound with clean linen soaked in a herbal softened, bandages it tightly. The boy is limp on the table, exhausted and pale, but he is alive, and his leg is intact. Master Ulrich finally looks at you, his face grim but satisfied. You did not look away. You held steady. There is hope for you yet. He hands you the bloody arrow shaft. Study this. Know your enemy. As you hold the object, you realize the wound man is no longer just a picture on a chart. He is real. He is this boy on the table. And today, for the first time, you helped to mend him. In the days following the incident with the blacksmith's apprentice, you find yourself paying more attention to the other side of Master Ulrich's business, the part that gives him his title. The barber in barber-surgeon wasn't just a historical footnote, it was a core part of the job. And it was deeply connected to his medical practice in a way that seems bizarre to you now. The front half of the shop, which you usually just sweep through, is set up for grooming. There's a more comfortable chair than the lowest used for surgery, a basin specifically for washing, and a collection of sharp razors, combs, and scissors that Ulrich keeps meticulously clean. And people come. Merchants on their way to a big meeting, young men preparing for a wedding, guild masters who want to look their best for a festival. They come for a haircut, a beard trim, or a clean shave. As an apprentice, this becomes another one of your duties. You learn to lather soap, to sharpen a razor on a leather strop until it can split a hair, and eventually to perform a simple haircut. It's far less stressful than holding down a screaming patient, and it allows you to observe a different side of your master. With his barbering clients, Ulrich is almost a different person. He's more relaxed, he makes small talk, he listens to the city's gossip. This, you realize, is a vital part of his practice. It's how he keeps his finger on the pulse of the community, hearing who is sick, who is injured, who is worried about their health. The barber shop is an information hub, but the two professions, barbering and surgery, were linked by more than just a shared workspace. They were linked by the blade and, most importantly, by blood. The single most common medical procedure performed by a barber-surgeon wasn't setting a bone or stitching a wound, it was phlebite or bloodletting. One morning, a well-to-do cloth merchant waddles into the shop, his face flushed and ruddy. He complains of a pounding headache, dizziness, and a general feeling of being overstuffed. He's a classic sanguine character, and by the logic of the four humors, his diagnosis is obvious: he has a dangerous excess of blood. The prescription is equally obvious: he needs to be bled. Master Ulrich gestures for the man to sit in the barber's chair. He has you bring over a special bleeding bowl, a small ceramic dish with a semicircular notch in the rim designed to fit snugly against a limb. Ulrich ties a tourniquet around the merchant's upper arm, and the veins in his elbow swell up, thick and blue. He selects a small, wicked-looking knife called a lancet. With a quick, practiced flick of the wrist, he nicks the vein. A stream of dark, rich blood spurts into the bowl. You watch fascinated. The goal isn't just to remove blood, but to remove the right amount. Ulrich watches the flow, the color of the blood, and the patient's reaction with intense focus. He might remove anywhere from a few ounces to a pint or more, depending on the severity of the imbalance. When he decides enough has been let out, he removes the tourniquet, and the flow subsides. He slaps a simple dressing on the small cut, and the procedure is over. The merchant, looking paler but visibly relieved, likely due to a drop in blood pressure, pays his fee and goes on his way, convinced he has been restored to health. This procedure was done for everything: headaches, fevers, infections, pneumonia, melancholy, even a broken heart. It was the medieval equivalent of taking an aspirin. And this is where the professions of barber and surgeon merged perfectly. Who else but a barber had the sharpest blades, the steadiest hands, and a chair ready for customers? Of course, there was a whole weird science behind it. Different veins were thought to be connected to different organs. You bleed from the arm for a liver complaint, but from a vein in the foot for a problem with the spleen. There were complex charts, a kind of zodiac man, showing which astrological signs governed which parts of the body, dictating the best days and times to be bled. Some historians debate how seriously the average barber-surgeon took these astrological charts, with many likely relying more on practical experience than the position of the moon. But the theory was there, a testament to the era's belief in a deeply interconnected cosmos. Here's a bizarre tangent: leeches. For more delicate areas where a lancet was impractical, like near the eye, or for a slower, more gentle bleeding, leeches were the tool of choice. Elric keeps a large jar of them, and part of your job is to care for them, which mostly involves changing their water. They were, in essence, self-propelling, single-use levity devices. The belief was that they not only removed the bad blood but also sucked out the morbid humors directly from the afflicted part. You learn that the distinction between a barber-surgeon and a simple barber could be a matter of guild regulation. In some cities like London, the two were officially separated into different guilds for a time, with the surgeons who performed major operations looking down on the simple barbers, who only pulled teeth and let blood. But in most places, the roles were fluid. A man might start as a barber and, through talent and ambition, take on more complex surgical cases, eventually earning the full title. As you sweep up the clipped hair from the floor, you ponder this strange duality. The same hand that gives a merchant a fashionable haircut is the one that sets a broken bone. The same blade that shaves a man's beard can open a vein to cure a fever. The shop is a place of both vanity and visceral reality. It's where the mundane maintenance of the body meets the desperate fight for its survival. And at the center of it all is the barber-surgeon, a master of blades, a keeper of secrets, and a true jack of all trades in the struggle for health. The clang of steel on steel is a constant background noise in your city, a rhythm of life and all too often of injury. One evening, just as Master Elric is preparing to close the shop, the door flies open and two city guardsmen stumble in, supporting a third between them. This man is pale, his breath coming in ragged gasps. HES clutching a thick, blood-soaked rag to his abdomen. Heaven brawl. One of the guards' grunts got out of hand. A dagger took him in the gut. This is different from the arrow wound. Different from a clean break. This is a deep, penetrating slash to the torso, the kind of injury that sends a chill down even Elric's spine. He immediately directs them to get the man onto the table. As they move him, his makeshift bandage comes loose. And you get a bandage comes loose. And you get a glimpse of the wound. It's a gaping, ugly cut, welling with dark blood that pulses weakly with the man's failing heartbeat. Elric rips a clean cloth and presses it firmly into the wound. "Hold that," he commands one of the guards. He turns to you, his face a grim mask. "Fire. I need the brazier, and I need it hot. And bring me the cautery irons. Your blood runs cold." You know what this means. You've seen the cautery irons hanging on the wall, a set of iron rods with differently shaped heads, one fat and disc-like, one pointed, one spherical. They look like tools for branding cattle, not for healing a man. You rush to the small charcoal brazier in the back. Pumping the bellows until the coals glow a fierce angry red, you place the irons directly into the heart of the fire. While you work, Elric quickly assesses the wound. His first priority is to stop the bleeding. If the man bleeds out, nothing else matters. The wound man chart flashes in your mind, the figure with the sword piercing his side. That image is a direct representation of this exact moment. But the chart only shows the injury, it doesn't convey the smell of blood and fear, or the desperate, rasping sound of a man fighting for his life. The primary method for stopping severe bleeding from a large, open wound in this area is cauterization. The theory is brutally simple: you burn the wound shut. The intense heat of the red-hot iron sears the flesh and small blood vessels, creating a layer of burnt tissue pressure that effectively seals the wound and stops the hemorrhage. It is agonizing, destructive, and terrifyingly effective. When the irons are glowing, you carefully bring one over to Elric, holding it by its long wooden handle. He takes it without a word, his eyes fixed on the task. He has the guards hold the wounded man down. "Forgive me, my friend," he whispers to the man who is barely conscious. Then he presses the glowing iron into the wound. There is a horrifying sizzle, a plume of smoke that smells of burnt meat, and a muffled, guttural scream from the man on the table. Even the seasoned guards flinch and look away. You force yourself to watch, your stomach churning. This is surgery at its most primal. Elric works quickly, applying the cautery in short, precise bursts, sealing the edges of the wound. The bleeding stops. The pulsing well of red is replaced by a blackened, charred crater. It's a horrific sight, but the man's breathing is already a little steadier. He has a chance. Now comes the controversial part. What to do with the wound itself? Elric begins to clean the area around the burn, but he does not stitch the gaping hole shut. This is where a major debate in medieval surgery raged, a conflict of ideas that historians still find fascinating. On one side, you had the school of thought, descended from surgeons like Theodoric of Lucca, who advocated for dry wound healing. They believed in cleaning the wound thoroughly, often with wine, stitching it shut if possible, and keeping it dry to encourage clean healing from the inside out. This is remarkably close to modern practice. On the other side, however, was the more dominant untraditional view, championed by the hugely influential Getty. This school believed that for a wound to heal properly, it needed to suppurate, that is, to produce pus. They believed that pus was a natural part of the healing process, a sign that the body was expelling its bad humors and toxins from the wound site. So they would actively encourage pus formation. How? By packing the wound with things that would irritate it. They de-stuff it with linen, lint, horsehair, or sponges soaked in rich, fatty ointments. This foreign material would keep the wound open, prevent it from closing, and almost guarantee a bacterial infection, which would then produce the desired pus. This leads us to one of the most wonderfully bizarre and misunderstood concepts in medical history: laudable pus. Surgeons would distinguish between different types of pus. A thick, white, odorless pus was considered laudable or praiseworthy, a sure sign that the wound was healing correctly and the body was successfully purging itself. Thin, watery, foul-smelling, or discolored pus, on the other hand, was a very bad sign, indicating that the body was losing the battle. Master Elric, being a practical man, seems to walk a line between the two schools. He has cauterized to stop the bleeding, but he packs the wound lightly, not with anything overly irritating, but with clean linen soaked in a salve of his own making, a mixture of honey and herbs. Honey, as we now know, has natural antibacterial properties and was a surprisingly effective, if accidental, healing agent. He doesn't stitch the cauterized wound shut, as that would trap any potential infection, leaving instructions for the guards on how to care for the man. The guards pay him and carry their wounded comrade out into the night. You are left in the quiet, smoky room, the acrid smell of burnt flesh still hanging in the air. You look at the dark, cooling cautery iron. It's a tool of immense violence, used in the service of healing. A paradox that sits at the very heart of your chosen trade. You have just witnessed one of the most brutal procedures in the medieval surgeon's arsenal, a desperate measure for a desperate injury. And you've learned that sometimes to save a life you must first be willing to burn it. The city guardsman survives the night. And the next. For the following week, his friends bring him back to the shop every other day for Master Elric to inspect the wound. Each time, you are the one to carefully unwrap the bandages, your fingers gentle, your breath held. The man whose name you learn is Thomas is weak and pale, but his eyes are clear. The wound in his abdomen, once a charred and terrifying crater, is beginning to change. On the 5th day, as you remove the dressing, you see it for the first time. Nestled in the crevices of the healing flesh is a thick, creamy, whitish substance. It doesn't have a foul smell, but it is undeniably pus. Your first instinct is one of revulsion. In your mind, pus means infection, decay, a sign that something is terribly wrong. You look at Elric with alarm. He leans in, peering at the wound with a practiced eye. He dips a finger into the substance, rubs it between his thumb and forefinger, and even gives it a slight clinical sniff. You try not to gag. Then he looks up, and for the first time since you started your apprenticeship, you see something that looks genuinely like a satisfied smile on his face. Good, he says, his voice full of approval. Laudable pus. Praiseworthy. He will heal well. You stare at him, baffled. Praiseworthy, you're looking at what seems to be the very definition of an infected wound, and your master is calling it a success. This is your formal introduction to one of the most counterintuitive and deeply entrenched beliefs in pre-modern medicine. Elric explains it to you, much as his own master likely explained it to him years ago. The body, when wounded, is in a state of turmoil. The balance of the humors is thrown into chaos, According to the teachings of Galen and the masters who followed him, a deep wound is a place where the body's natural heat begins a process of cauterization, or cooking, of the humors. This process is necessary to separate the pure from the impure. The pus, he tells you, is the physical manifestation of the body's victory. It is the peccant humors, the bad stuff, being cooked and expelled from the body. Therefore, a wound that heals too quickly, without producing any pus, is viewed with great suspicion. It's considered an unnatural healing. The surgeon would worry that the bad humors had not been properly expelled, but had instead been trapped inside the body, where they could fester and cause a more serious internal illness later on. So, a surgeon's goal was not to prevent infection in the modern sense, but to manage it. They were actively trying to produce a specific type of infection, one that resulted in a good kind of pus. This is why they packed wounds with foreign objects like lint or horsehair. These irritants would keep the wound open and festering, guaranteeing the production of the pus they saw as essential for a true cure. It's a complete inversion of modern germ theory. They weren't fighting bacteria, they were actively cultivating it, believing it to be a necessary part of the cure. The historical debate around this is fascinating. Some medical historians argue that the laudable pus theory was one of the single greatest roadblocks to surgical progress for centuries. It actively harmed patients and prevented surgeons from adopting cleaner, more effective methods like those of Luca, who argued for washing wounds with wine and closing them. However, other historians offer a more nuanced view. They suggest that in an age without antibiotics, a localized, pus-producing infection in a wound might have been preferable to a systemic, blood-borne infection like sepsis. By keeping the infection contained at the wound site, the body's immune system had a fighting chance to overcome it. The formation of a contained abscess, full of laudable pus, might have been, in a strange way, the lesser of two evils. The body was walling off the infection, and the surgeons were simply misinterpreting this natural defense mechanism as a sign of their treatment success. You also learn a weirdly specific tidbit about this practice. Surgeons had a whole vocabulary to describe the state of a wound. A hollow wound was one that produced a lot of pus. A fleshy wound was one that was healing cleanly. But the desired state was often a wound was incantating, meaning it was filling in with new flesh from the bottom up, all while producing a healthy amount of that good creamy pus. As you redress Thomas' wound, packing it lightly with fresh linen soaked in Elric's honeyed salve, your understanding of healing is turned completely on its head. Honey, you now realize, was probably doing two things at once. Its natural antibacterial properties were likely preventing the worst kinds of bacteria from taking hold, while its sugary nature still provided a medium for some bacteria to grow, thus producing the pus that satisfied Elric's theoretical framework, a treatment that worked for reasons its practitioners didn't understand. Over the next few weeks, you watch as Thomas's wound slowly heals, closing in from the edges. The amount of pus lessens each day, until finally only a puckered, red scar remains. Thomas, now able to walk on his own, is eternally grateful. He is living proof, in the eyes of your community, of Master Elric's skill. He took a fatal wound and, by guiding the body through its natural, pus-filled healing process, brought the man back from the brink. You, however, are left with a profound and unsettling thought: how many of the things you are learning are true, and how many are just beautifully wrong. Not all injuries arrive at the shop accompanied by the drama of a sword fight or a freak accident. Some are the slow, grinding result of hard labor. One afternoon, two farmhands from a nearby village carry their father into the shop on a makeshift litter. The old man is groaning, his face contorted in pain. He had been up on a ladder, repairing the roof of his barn, when a rung snapped. He fell, landing awkwardly on his right leg. Master Elric's examination is swift and certain. He runs his hands along the man's shin, his fingers probing for the telltale signs of a fracture. The old man cries out when Elric's fingers press a specific spot. There's a slight, unnatural angle to the lower leg, and a faint grating sound crepitus. The sound of broken bone ends rubbing against each other, a fracture of both the tibia and fibula, Elric announces. A bad break, but the bone has not pierced the skin. This is good. This is a closed fracture, a common but serious injury. Once again, the Wound Man chart serves as your mental reference. While it's famous for its depiction of weapons, it also often included injuries from falls or accidents, sometimes shown as simple contusions or swellings. This old farmer is just another version of the Wound Man. His injury caused not by malice but by gravity and rotten wood. The first step, Elric explains, is reduction. The broken bones must be put back into their proper alignment. If they heal crooked, the man will be crippled for life. This procedure, known as taxis, is the very definition of this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. Except, of course, it's going to hurt the patient immensely. There is no anesthesia for this. The farmer is given a generous slug of brandy and a leather strap to bite on. Elric has the two strong sons help. One is instructed to hold his father's shoulders down firmly against the table. The other is positioned at his father's foot. Elric takes his place at the site of the break. Hold him steady, he tells the son at the shoulders. To the other he says, when I give the word you will pull. Pull straight and hard, as if you are trying to stretch his leg an inch longer. Ulrich places his powerful hands on either side of the fracture. Feeling the displaced bones through the skin, he closes his eyes for a moment, visualizing the two jagged ends of the tibia. Then, he opens them and gives a sharp nod. Now, the son pulls. The old farmer screams a raw, animal sound of pure agony that fills the small shop. As the muscles are stretched taut by the traction, Elric uses his thumbs and fingers to manipulate the broken bones, pushing and guiding them. Trying to coax them back into alignment, you can hear a sickening, wet grinding sound. You watch, mesmerized and horrified, as Elric works entirely by feel, his hands reading the hidden language of the man's skeleton. After a tense, sweat-soaked minute, he feels the bones lock back into place with a dull thump hold. He commands the son. The pulling stops. The reduction is complete. Now the leg must be immobilized. Elric calls for you to bring the splints and bandages. The splints are simple, flat pieces of wood padded with soft wool. He places them on either side of the leg from the ankle to above the knee. Then he begins to wrap, but this isn't just a simple bandaging. He has you bring a bowl of a thick, foul-smelling mixture. It's a concoction of egg whites, flour, and other binding agents, creating a sort of medieval plaster. He soaks long strips of linen in this paste and then wraps them firmly around the splintered leg. As the mixture dries, it will harden into a rigid, protective cast, holding the bones perfectly still so they can knit back together. This technique of using a hardening cast was surprisingly advanced. While the full plaster of Paris cast as we know it wouldn't be perfected until the 19th century, the core concept of a rigid, custom-molded dressing was well understood by many ancient and medieval surgeons. The Arabs, in particular, were known for their sophisticated use of lime and egg whites to create effective casts. Of course, as with everything in medieval medicine, there were some truly bizarre beliefs attached to bone setting. A common folk belief, which sometimes crept into medical texts, was the idea of a bone-setting prayer or charm. It was believed that reciting a specific formula over a broken limb could magically aid the healing process. One famous charm from a 10th century manuscript goes something like bone to bone, sinew to sinew, so be they healed. The debate for historians is whether the surgeons who wrote these charms down actually believed in their magical efficacy, or if they were simply reciting them as a way to calm and reassure a terrified patient, a sort of a bedside manner. Elric finishes wrapping the leg. The makeshift cast is bulky and crude, but it will do the job. He gives the sons strict instructions. The father must remain off his feet for at least 6 weeks. They are to watch for any signs of swelling in the toes, or if the leg turns cold or dark signs that the bandages are to tighten or cutting off the blood flow. He also gives them a pain-relieving tincture made from willow bark, which contains salicin, the natural compound from which aspirin is derived. It's another one of those happy accidents where a traditional remedy had a genuine pharmacological basis. The sons pay Elric, not just with coin, but with the promise of a fat hen and a sack of grain at harvest time. They carefully lift their father, his leg now encased in its hardening shell, and carry him home. You are left to clean up the mess. As you wipe down the table, you think about the incredible skill you just witnessed. There were no X-rays, No sterile operating rooms, no modern anesthetics. There was just knowledge posed to fit together. There was strength, intuition, and a profound, tactile understanding of the hidden architecture of bone and muscle. It was brutal, it was agonizing, but it was also a small miracle of mechanical engineering, performed by hand, in a dusty little shop on a grey afternoon. A week after you helped set the farmer's leg, a woman from a nearby village comes into the shop. She's frantic. Her young son, about 10 years old, fell from a tree and his arm is bent at a sickening angle. Master Elric is out for the afternoon, visiting a wealthy patient in another part of the city. The woman looks at you, her eyes wide with panic. Please, she begs, they told me the surgeon was here. My boy is in such pain. You know the protocol. You know what Elric would do. You've seen it. But you're just an apprentice. To touch a patient, to perform a procedure without your master present, is a serious breach of etiquette and guild rules. You try to explain that she must wait for Master Elric, but the boy lets out a pained whimper, and the mother's face crumples in despair. Just then a stooped, elderly man who had been sweeping the street outside leans on his broom in the doorway. If the surgeon's away, he says, his voice raspy with age, and the boy's in pain, you should take him to see old Meg. The mother's head snaps up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. The bone setter. Aye, the old man nods. She's got the touch. Fixed my shoulder last year after a cart threw me. Better than new. The woman thanks him, hoists her son, and hurries off down the street in the direction the sweeper pointed. You were left feeling a mixture of relief and intense curiosity. I burned set to someone outside the official system of barber-surgeons, practicing a craft that is, technically Elric's domain. When Elric returns, you tell him what happened. You expect him to be angry, to rail against the unlicensed competition. Instead he just sighs, a weary, familiar sound. Old Meg, he says, shaking his head. Aye, she's been at it for years. Her mother was a bone setter before her. This is your introduction to the vast and often hidden world of folk medicine and specialized healers that operated in the shadow of the official medical establishment. While men like Elric, with their formal apprenticeships and guild memberships, represented the official face of surgery, they were far from the only option available to the common person. All across the country, in villages and towns, there were people known as bone setters. These practitioners were often, though not exclusively, women. They didn't have surgical texts or fancy tools. Their knowledge was purely empirical, passed down through families, from mother to daughter or father to son. They specialized in one thing and one thing and one thing only, manipulating the musculoskeletal system. They treated fractures, dislocation, and other joint problems. Their methods were based entirely on touch, the feel of a dislocation, the subtle grating of a fracture. They possessed what was often described as a knack or a gift, an intuitive, hands-on understanding of the body's mechanics. The relationship between these folk healers and the formally trained surgeons was complex and often fraught with tension. Many surgeons in their writings were openly scornful of bone setters, dismissing them as ignorant, untrained quacks who did more harm than good. They would recount horror stories of limbs being set crookedly, leading to permanent disability, or of dislocations being mistaken for fractures, with disastrous results. And yet the public continued to seek them out. Why, for one, they were often more accessible and affordable than a city surgeon. For another, they had a reputation for being effective. This is one of those areas where historians are still piecing together the full picture. It's likely that the skill of bone setters varied enormously. Some were probably incompetent and dangerous, but many, like the famous Mully the bone setter from 18th century England, were renowned for their incredible skill, succeeding where university-trained surgeons had failed. Their deep practical knowledge of anatomy, learned through generations of hands-on experience, sometimes surpassed the more theoretical, book-based knowledge of the surgeons. A particularly fascinating aspect of this tradition is the secrecy that often surrounded it. The knack was a closely guarded family secret. The specific manipulations and techniques were not written down but were taught through direct observation and practice. This secrecy was partly to protect their livelihood, but it also added to their mystique. It made their healing abilities seem more like a form of innate magic than a learned skill. A few days later, out of curiosity, you take a walk through the part of town the sweeper had indicated. You see the boy who had broken his arm. He's playing in the street with his friends, his arm held in a sling, but his face is free of pain. He even manages a cheerful wave with his good arm. Later, you see his mother, who tells you that old Meg, a tiny, wizened woman with incredibly strong hands, had fixed the arm in moments. She hadn't used a cast of flour and egg whites, but a simpler arrangement of padded splints and linen, expertly tied. The mother is convinced the woman has a divine gift. You return to the shop, contemplating this parallel world of medicine. Master Elric represents the established, literate tradition of surgery, a craft with rules, texts, and a lineage stretching back to the ancient Greeks. Old Meg represents an older, old tradition, a form of knowledge rooted in experience, intuition, and community trust. They are rivals in a sense, but they are also two sides of the same coin, both trying to mend the broken bodies of their community. You realize that the story of medieval medicine isn't just about men like Elric. It's also about the old Megs of the world, whose names and stories are mostly history, but whose hands brought relief to countless ordinary people. The official record may not remember them, but the bones of the people they healed certainly did. Spring arrives, and with it, the world thaws. The fields and forests around the city come alive, and people venture out to forage, hunt, and work the land. This seasonal shift brings a new category of injury to your door, one vividly depicted on the Wound Man chart: the animal bite. It's right there on his lower leg, a snake, coiled and menacing, its fangs sunk deep into the flesh. Your first case isn't a snake but a dog. A tanner's assistant, a young man with a cocky swagger, comes in with his hand wrapped in a bloody rag. HED tried to break up a dogfight over a scrap of meat and had earned a deep bite on his forearm for his trouble. Master Elric wraps the hand, his face grim. The wound is a nasty-looking puncture, deep and jagged. A dog's tooth is a foul thing, Elric mutters. He isn't just talking about dirt. The prevailing medical theory held that the danger of an animal bite wasn't just the physical wound, but the specific poison or venom that the animal transmitted through its saliva. Every type of animal was believed to have its own unique venom with different properties. The venom of a dog, especially a mad dog one with rabies, was considered particularly pernicious. The fear of rabies, a disease they called hydrophobia, was immense. They didn't understand viruses, of course, but they knew that a bite from a mad dog could lead to a horrific death days or weeks later, marked by madness, convulsions, and a terrifying inability to swallow water. The treatment for a dog bite was aggressive. First, Elric widens the wound with his lancet, encouraging it to bleed freely. The idea is to let the poison flow out with the blood. Next, he takes a small, heated cup, a technique called cupping, and places it over the wound. As the air inside the cup cools, it creates a vacuum, sucking the skin and flesh upwards. This was also believed to draw the venom out from the deeper tissues. It's a non-invasive version of the same principle: get the bad stuff out. Finally, and most importantly, comes the cautery. Just as with the deep sword wound, the red-hot iron is the ultimate weapon. Elric takes a pointed cautery iron from the brazier and, after a warning to the young man, plunges it directly into the puncture wounds left by the dog's teeth. The tanner's assistant yells and curses, but Elric is unfazed. Burning the wound was considered the only sure way to destroy any lingering venom from a potentially rabid dog and, prevent the dreaded hydrophobia. After the cauterization, he applies a special dressing. These dressings for bites were often complex concoctions, a sort of antivenom poultice. A famous and widely used one was called the Rieg. This was a hugely complex medicinal jam, a kind of cure-all that could contain dozens, sometimes hundreds of ingredients, including everything from common herbs and spices to more exotic components, like deer's was prevalent. So including the flesh of a venomous snake in a remedy for poison made perfect, if strange sense. Now about that snake on the wound man's leg. Snake bites were a real and terrifying threat, especially for farm workers. The treatment followed a similar, if even more dramatic logic. The first step was always to try and stop the venom from spreading. A tourniquet would be tied tightly above the bite. Then the surgeon would often make deep cuts over the fang marks in a crisscross pattern, before applying a cupping glass or even attempting to suck the venom out with their mouth, an incredibly risky procedure. This is where you encounter a particularly weird and wonderful bit of folk medicine that made its way into learned text, the snake stone or bezoar. A bezoar is a hard, stone-like mass found in the stomach or intestines of certain animals like goats or deer. It's essentially a wad of undigested hair and fiber. These stones were considered one of the most powerful universal antidotes in the world. If you were bitten by a snake or poisoned, you would place a bezoar stone on the wound. It was believed to have the magical ability to stick to the wound and draw out the poison. Once it was full, it would fall off. To recharge the stone, you would soak it in milk until it released the poison, turning the milk dark. These were incredibly rare and valuable. Bezoar could be worth more than gold. While chemically inert and medically useless, the psychological comfort they provided was immense. The historical debate here isn't about whether these treatments worked, they mostly didn't, beyond the occasional lucky cauterization of a rabid dog bite, but about how people rationalized them. The system of venoms and antidotes was a way of imposing order on a chaotic and frightening world. They may not have understood microbiology or toxicology, but they created a framework that allowed them to act. Doing something, even if it was wrong, felt better than doing nothing in the face of a potentially fatal threat. Alric finishes dressing the tanner's wound. He gives the young man a stern lecture on the foolishness of tangling with angry dogs and sends him on his way, with a small pot of salve and a warning to return if he feels any fever or strange agitation. You clean the tools, the smell of burnt flesh once again faint in the air. The wound man's menagerie of attackers, the dog, the snake, the bee, all represent a fundamental conflict: humanity versus the untamed natural world. Each bite and sting is a reminder that the city walls are a fragile defense. Out there, in the woods and fields, are countless creatures with their own natural weapons, their own venoms, and for each one, the surgeon had to have a counter move. A ritual of fire and herbs designed to fight back against the poison and reclaim the body from the wild. Of all the injuries depicted on the wound man, the one to the head is perhaps the most unnerving. A club or mace struck his temple, leaving a bloody, contused wound. It hints at the gravest danger of all: an injury not to the limbs, but to the very seat of reason and consciousness. One day you are confronted with the reality of this injury, and the terrifying surgery designed to treat it. Astonemason is carried into the shop by his guild brothers. He was working on the new cathedral when a block of stone slipped from a hoist, glancing off his head before crashing to the ground. He is conscious, but barely. He is dazed, confused, and one of his pupils is much larger than the other, a sign that Elric immediately recognizes as a dangerous pressure building inside the skull. "There is a bleed," Elric says, his voice slow and serious. The blow has fractured the skull, and blood is pooling between the bone and the brain. If we do not relieve the pressure, it will kill him. There is only one way to do that. He must open the man's skull. He calls for a tool you have only ever seen him clean, never use. It is the trepan. The word alone is enough to make you shiver. Trepanning, or trepanation, is the ancient surgical procedure of drilling or scraping a hole into the human skull. It is, without a doubt, the oldest surgical procedure known to humanity, with evidence of it found in Neolithic skulls thousands of years old. The tools Elric lays out are intimidating. There's a surgical razor to shave the man's head. There's a sturdy brace, similar to a carpenter's drill, but fitted with a fearsome-looking circular saw bit called a mord, iolus, or a crown trepan. There's also a set of elevators and probes for lifting the bone and exploring the wound. The mason is given a massive dose of wine laced with opium, a crude and dangerous attempt to dull his senses. His friends hold him down. You are tasked with holding his head, cupping his skull in your hands to keep it perfectly still. You can feel the unnatural buggy texture of the scalp over the fracture site where blood has collected. First, Elric shaves the hair around the wound. Then, using a scalpel, he makes a horseshoe-shaped incision, cutting the scalp and peeling it back to expose the pale, blood-smeared bone of the skull beneath. The sight is so alien, so intimate, it takes your breath away. Now comes the trepan. Elric fits the crown saw into the brace. It has a central pin, a little spike that he places carefully on a solid part of the skull near the fracture line. This pin will keep the saw from slipping as he begins to turn. He puts the handle of the brace against his chest and begins to rotate it, slowly and deliberately. A high-pitched, grating sound fills the room as the teeth of the saw bite into the bone. You can feel the vibration through your hands. Bone dust, like fine sawdust, begins to accumulate around the circular groove. Elric works with incredible focus. The danger is immense. He must cut through the hard outer table of the skull and the spongy, diploid layer, but he must stop before he pierces the dura mater, the tough membrane protecting the brain. A slip of an inch, a moment of too much pressure, and he would drive the saw directly into the man's brain, killing him instantly. Why would anyone do this? The reasons for trepanation have been fiercely debated by archaeologists and historians for decades. In prehistoric times, it may have been for ritualistic or magical reasons, perhaps to release evil spirits thought to be causing headaches or madness. By the medieval period, however, the primary reasons were medical, if based on their own understanding of anatomy. The most common reason was a skull fracture, like this one. They knew that a depressed fracture, where a piece of bone is pushed inward, could put pressure on the brain. Trepanning allowed them to create a hole through which they could insert a tool, lift the depressed fragment back into place, and remove any bone splinters. It was also done, as in this case, to drain a hematoma, a collection of blood that was causing dangerous intracranial pressure. A bizarre and less common justification for trepanation was to treat epilepsy or recurring, severe migraines. The logic, rooted in humoral theory, was that these conditions were caused by noxious vapors or corrupt humors trapped inside the head. Drilling a hole would, quite literally, let them out. It's a terrifyingly literal interpretation of letting off some steam. Elric stops frequently, using a feather to brush away the bone dust and a probe to check the depth of the cut. He is like a master craftsman working with the most precious material imaginable. After what seems like an eternity of grating and turning, there is a subtle change in the sound, a slight easing of resistance. He has broken through the inner table of the skull. He carefully removes the trepan. In his hand is a perfect, small disc of bone. And from the hole he has created, a dark, viscous trickle of blood begins to seep out. The pressure is being released. He uses a probe to gently clear the opening, ensuring the blood can flow freely. He does not put the bone disc back, it is discarded. The hole will be left open, covered only by the scalp. Over time, the tough dura mater in the scalp itself would form a protective layer, but there would always be a soft, vulnerable spot on the man's head. Many trap and skulls found by archaeologists show signs of healing, indicating that a surprising number of people survived this incredible ordeal. Elric cleans the area with wine and carefully stitches the flap of scalp back into place, leaving a small opening at the bottom for any further drainage. He bandages the man's head loosely. The mason's breathing is already deeper and more regular. The tension in the room breaks. The man's life has, for now, been saved by a procedure that looks more like carpentry than medicine. You release your grip on the man's head, your arms aching. You have just been an accessory to one of the most dangerous and dramatic acts in all of surgery. You look at the small, bloody disc of bone on the side table, a perfect circle of what was once a man's skull. It is a chilling testament to the lengths a surgeon would go to, boring into the very house of the soul to save a life. The stonemason survives the trepanation. He remains in a state of groggy confusion for days, but the terrifying pressure in his head is gone. His survival is a testament to Elric's skill and a healthy dose of sheer luck. But the procedure highlights a question that has been nagging at you through every scream-filled minute of your apprenticeship: how do they manage the pain? The simple, brutal answer is that, for the most part, they don't. Pain was seen as an unavoidable, intrinsic part of both injury and treatment. For most procedures, setting a bone, stitching a minor wound, letting blood, the only anesthetic offered was a strap of leather to bite on, a swig of strong alcohol, and the surgeon's stern command to be brave. The ability to endure pain was considered a virtue, a sign of a strong constitution. But for something as extreme as an amputation or a trepanation, surgeons knew that the shock from pain alone could kill a patient. They needed something, anything, to dull the senses, even if it was just for a few precious minutes. This is where you enter the murky, dangerous world of medieval anesthetic. One afternoon, Elric has you sorting and inventorying his supply of dried herbs and bottled concoctions. He picks up a dark, gnarled root from a dusty box. Mandragora, he says, holding it up. The mandrake root, powerful and dangerous. The mandrake was one of the most famous and feared ingredients in the medieval pharmacopoeia. Surrounded by myth and legend, it was believed that the root screamed when pulled from the earth, and that its scream could kill anyone who heard it. Folk tales described elaborate rituals for harvesting it, involving tying a dog to the plant to pull it up, so the animal would die instead of the harvester. While this was pure folklore, the plant's reputation was rooted in its very real and very potent chemical properties. Mandrake contains powerful anticholesterol alkaloids that, in the right dose, can cause sedation, hallucinations, and amnesia. In the wrong dose, it can cause delirium, respiratory failure, and death. It was a key ingredient in a concoction known as the soporific sponge, or spong ia somnifera. This was the closest thing the Middle Ages had to a general anesthetic. A surgeon would take a sea sponge and soak it in a potent brew of plant extracts, a recipe that varied but almost always included opium poppy, henbane, and mandrake. The sponge would then be dried and stored. When it was time for a major operation, the surgeon would moisten the sponge with warm water and hold it over the patient's nose and mouth. The patient would inhale the fumes, and with luck, fall into a deep, stuporous sleep, allowing the surgeon to work without the patient thrashing in agony. The problem was the dosage. There was no way to measure it accurately. The potency of the plants could vary wildly depending on the season they were harvested and how they were prepared. Every time a soporific sponge was used, it was a roll of the dice. Too little, and the patient would wake up mid-surgery. Too much, and they would simply never wake up at all. Historians are still debating how widely and effectively the soporific sponge was actually used. Some medical texts describe it in detail, suggesting it was a known if risky. Others dismiss it as unreliable and dangerous, preferring speed over sedation. The consensus seems to be that it was a real practice, but a rare and high-stakes one, likely reserved for only the most extreme circumstances and performed by the most experienced or daring surgeon. Beyond this volatile cocktail, there were other simpler methods. The most common was alcohol. A patient would be given as much strong wine or distilled spirits as they could drink, hoping to render them drunk to the point of near unconsciousness. This was more reliable than the sponge, but it had its own problems. It could increase bleeding, and a drunk patient could still be belligerent and difficult to restrain. Then there was opium. The solidified resin from the opium poppy was a known and powerful painkiller. It was often administered orally, mixed with wine or honey into a thick syrup called laudanum. This was effective for managing post-operative pain, like the tincture Elric gave the farmer with the broken leg. However, it was less useful for inducing surgical anesthesia because it was slow to act and, again, the dosage was incredibly difficult to get right. It was a fine line between pain relief and a fatal overdose. One of the weirdest and most niche forms of anesthesia was compression. For limb amputations, some surgeons would tie it to a nicket incredibly tightly above the surgical site. This not only reduced bleeding but, after a few minutes, would also cause the nerves to go numb, providing a temporary, localized anesthetic effect. It was, essentially, the same feeling as when your foot falls asleep, but weaponized for surgery. You put the gnarled mandrake root back in its box, a new respect for its dark power coursing through you. The quest to conquer pain is one of the great narratives of medical history, and you are living in its early brutal chapters. There are no safe, reliable options. Every attempt to shield a patient from the knife's edge is a gamble. Speed is the surgeon's greatest ally. A good surgeon was not necessarily the most gentle, but the fastest. The famous Napoleonic surgeon Dominique Nel-Airy could reportedly amputate a leg in under a minute. In a world without effective anesthesia, every second saved was a universe of agony spared. As you finish your work, you realize that pain is a constant presence in the shop. It arrives with every patient, it fills the air during every procedure, and it lingers long after. The few tools Elric has to fight it are crude, unreliable, and almost as dangerous as the injuries themselves. The true age of painless surgery is centuries away, a distant, impossible dream. Your apprenticeship is no longer just about observing, it's about participating. Master Elric has started entrusting you with more responsibility, and that means becoming intimately familiar with the tools of the trade. One day, he decides it's time for a formal lesson. He lays a large leather roll on the table and unfurls it. Inside, nestled in individual loops and pockets, is his personal surgical kit. Seeing them all laid out at once, gleaming and sinister, is a powerful sight. A surgeon is no better than his instruments, Elric says, his voice taking on the tone of a master craftsman. You must know them as well as you know your own hands. You must know how they feel, how they balance, and how to keep them sharp enough to shave God's beard. He picks up the most basic and common tool, the scalpel. It looks much like a modern one, a small, sharp blade for making fine incisions. But unlike a disposable blade, this one is a permanent tool. It is your job to sharpen it on a whetstone and strop it on leather until the edge is perfect. A dull scalpel, Elric explains, tears flesh instead of cutting it, leading to a ragged wound that heals poorly. Next to the scalpels are the forceps. Some are delicate, like tweezers for removing splinters or tiny fragments of bone. Others are much larger and more robust with serrated teeth, designed for gripping and pulling. These are the crow's beak forceps, used for extracting arrowheads or deeply embedded objects. Holding one, you can feel its raw, powerful utility. Then he points to a tool that looks like a pair of brutal-looking scissors but with thick, heavy blades. Bone shears, he says, for when you must cut through a rib or a small bone. It requires strength. You must cut cleanly, not crush. This is a tool used in the most desperate of surgeries, like opening the chest cavity, or more commonly, in an amputation. He shows you the surgical saw. It's smaller than a carpenter's saw with a finer set of teeth, but its purpose is just as stark. Amputation was a last resort, performed for a limb that was crushed beyond repair, afflicted with gangrene, or suffering from a spreading infection. The procedure was a horrific, high-speed affair. The surgeon would use a special curved knife to cut a flap of skin and muscle, pull it back to expose the bone, and then the saw would do its work. The goal was to get through the bone in as few strokes as possible. The flap of skin was then used to cover the stump, providing a cleaner surface for healing. Elric then picks up a set of long, slender metal rods of varying thickness. These are probes and sounds. They are not for cutting, but for exploring. A surgeon would use a probe to investigate the depth and track of a stab wound, or to feel for a piece of shrapnel or a bladder stone. It was a way of seeing with his fingertips, exploring the hidden, internal landscape of an injury. Of course, with all these invasive tools, there's a curious and somewhat contentious historical point: hygiene. Did they clean their tools? The short answer is yes, but not for the reasons we do. The concept of germs and bacterial infection was centuries away. Elric insists that you clean every tool meticulously after each use, scrubbing it with sand and water, wiping it with vinegar, and polishing it until it shines. But his reason is not to kill microbes. It's a matter of professional pride and practicality. A clean tool is less likely to rust. A polished tool moves more smoothly. A surgeon's tools were a significant investment, a sign of his status and skill, and they work aired for as such. The fact that this cleaning process might have accidentally removed some bacteria was a fortunate, but entirely unintended, side effect. A fascinating and weirdly specific tool you learn about is the uvula forceps. The uvula, that little punching bag-shaped piece of tissue hanging at the back of the throat, was sometimes blamed for chronic coughs or snoring. A particularly daring surgeon might attempt to snip it off. The special forceps were designed with a double-bladed guillotine action to do the job in one quick, terrifying motion. It's a perfect example of how, when all you have is a hammer or, in this case, a sharp cutting tool, everything starts to look like a nail. The debate among historians of science is about the pace of innovation for these tools. While some instruments, like the scalpel and forceps, have remained conceptually similar for millennia, the medieval period did see some specialized advancements, particularly in military surgery, tools for extracting arrows, special pliers for dealing with crossbow bolts, and more effective saws were all developed out of grim necessity on the battlefield. As Ulrich finishes explaining the basic kit, you look down at the array of polished steel. They are beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. They are instruments of violence, designed to cut, saw, and pierce. But in the hands of a skilled surgeon, they are also instruments of hope. They are the physical manifestation of an ancient, audacious idea that a human being, and by doing so, make them whole again. These are not just pieces of metal, Elric says as he begins to roll the kit back up. They are an extension of your will, your knowledge, and your nerve. Respect them. Care for them. And when the time comes, do not hesitate to use them. The weight of that responsibility, the literal and figurative weight of the tools, settles upon you more heavily than ever before. Weeks turn into months, and your confidence grows with each successfully bandaged wound and correctly identified herb. You learn to read the signs of the body, the language of pain, and the subtle shifts in the humors. But just as you start to feel that you and Master Elric are the sole arbiters of health and healing in your small world, you are reminded of a much greater, more powerful physician whose influence permeates everything God. A young woman is brought to the shop by her husband. She is deathly pale, suffering from a persistent bleeding that no herbal remedy or dietary change has been able to stop. Elric examines her, his face growing graver by the moment. He tries several treatments, cooling foods to counteract the heat of the blood, astringent herbs to try and stem the flow, but nothing works. The woman grows weaker by the day. Finally, Elric sits down with the husband, his voice gentle. "I have done all that my art allows," he says, a rare admission of fallibility. "Her illness is beyond my skill. Perhaps it is time to seek a different kind of cure." He doesn't need to say more. The husband understands. He is not recommending another surgeon, he is recommending prayer. This is a crucial aspect of medieval medicine that is easy to overlook. The surgeon and the priest were not competitors, they were two parts of a comprehensive healthcare system. The surgeon treated the body, the vessel, but the ultimate source of all healing was divine. Illness and injury were often seen as having a spiritual component. Perhaps the affliction was a punishment for a sin, a test of faith, or the work of a malevolent demon. A complete cure required not just physical treatment but also spiritual intervention. The husband, his face etched with desperation, asks Elric what they should do. Elric tells them of the local church's most prized possession, a small fragment of bone said to be from the finger of Saint Cosmas. Saints Cosmas and Damian were twin brothers and physicians from the 3rd century who, according to legend, offered their medical services for free. They became the patron saints of doctors and surgeons, and their relics were believed to hold powerful healing properties. The next day, the entire community is abuzz. The woman and her husband, with Elric's blessing, have made a pilgrimage to the church. They prayed, made an offering, and the priest allowed the woman to touch the holy relic. This reliance on faith-based healing was everywhere. People would travel for hundreds of miles to visit the shrines of specific saints known for curing particular ailments. Saint Apollonia was the one to pray to for Tethech. Saint Roch was the protector against plague. Saint Vitus for epilepsy, which was often called street. Vitus's dance. The walls of these shrines were often covered in ex voto, small wax or metal models of the body part that had been healed, a leg, an arm, an eye. These were left as offerings of thanks, a testament to the saint's power. This brings up a quirky and fascinating practice, the diagnosis by pilgrimage. Sometimes a physician, unsure of a diagnosis, would send a patient on a pilgrimage to a specific shrine. The thinking was, if the patient was healed, it was proof that the ailment was indeed the one that particular saint specialized in. It was a kind of divine differential diagnosis. The academic debate here is not about whether these miracles really happened, but about the social and psychological function they served. For the patient, the act of pilgrimage, the focused prayer, and the support of the community could create a powerful placebo effect, mobilizing the body's own healing resources. For the physician or surgeon, it was an essential part of their practice. Acknowledging the limits of their own skill in turning to a higher power was not a sign of failure, but of piety and wisdom. A good surgeon knew when his job ended and God's began. A few days later, the woman's husband bursts into the shop, his face alight with joy. "It's a miracle," he proclaims. "The bleeding has stopped. Saint Cosmas has healed her." The news spreads through the city like wildfire. It is seen as a clear sign of God's favor. Master Elric simply nods, a calm, unreadable expression on his face. Did he expect this? Did he believe the relic itself had power? Or did he believe that the woman's faith was the curative agent? Or perhaps, did he know that her particular ailment was one that sometimes resolved on its own? And the timing was a fortunate coincidence, he never says. The event reinforces a vital lesson for you. You are not a modern scientist working in a secular world of cause and effect. You are a medieval craftsman, working in a world steeped in faith. The line between medicine and magic, between science and superstition, is blurry and permeable. A healing salve might contain herbs with real medicinal properties, but it will also be prepared while reciting a prayer. A surgeon will set a bone with mechanical skill, but he will also advise the patient to pray for a good recovery. You realize that to be a successful surgeon in this world, you need more than just a steady hand and a sharp knife. You need to understand the complex interplay of body and soul. You need to know when to apply a poultice and when to recommend a prayer. Because in this world, the operating theater is not just a room with a table, it's a sacred space where frail human skill works in the shadow of an all-powerful and sometimes merciful God. Your world is one of blood, bone, and the tangible realities of the human body. You are learning a craft, a manual skill, but you are acutely aware that there is another class of healer in this city, one you rarely see but whose presence is always felt. They are the physicians, and they inhabit a completely different world. One day, a messenger arrives at the shop. He is dressed in the fine livery of a wealthy wool merchant, one of the city's most powerful men. The message is not for Master Elric to come and treat the merchant, but for him to come and attend a consultation. The merchant's wife is gravely ill, and the family has some under-physician from the university. The physician now requires the surgeon's presence. Elric dons his best tunic, and you accompany him, carrying his bag. You leave your familiar, chaotic neighborhood and enter the wealthy quarter of the city, where the streets are wider and cleaner, and the houses are made of stone. The merchant's home is a grand, 3-story building. Inside, the air is still and smells of expensive beeswax candles and dried lavender. You are led to the sick room. The merchant's wife lies in a large canopied bed, looking frail and feverish. But your attention is immediately drawn to the man standing by the window, examining a glass flask filled with the patient's urine. This is the physician. He is everything Elric is not. He is dressed in a long dark robe, trimmed with fur, a sign of his academic status. His hands are soft and uncalloused, his face clean-shaven. He does not look at the patient directly, he looks at the flask, holding it up to the light. This practice, uroscopy, is the physician's signature diagnostic tool. He is not just looking at the color, he is studying its clarity, its sediment, its smell, and even, in some cases, its taste. Complex charts that linked dozens of different shades of urine to specific internal imbalances of the humors. The physician finally speaks, his voice calm and authoritative, his Latin peppered with scholarly Greek terms. He declares that the lady is suffering from a surfeit of choler, a hot and dry affliction of the liver. He prescribes a course of treatment, a cooling diet of barley water and cucumbers, a gentle purging of the bowels with a laxative, and the application of a poultice of crushed violets to her forehead. He never once touches the patient. Then he turns to Elric. "And surgeon," he says with a tone that is not quite a command, but is certainly not a request, "you will perform a phlebite, a modest one, from the basilic vein in the right arm. It will help to cool the blood." This interaction perfectly encapsulates the rigid hierarchy of medieval medicine. At the top was the physician. He was a man of learning, a university graduate who had studied the classical texts of Galen, Hippocrates, and Avicenna. He was a member of the elite. His domain was internal medicine, diagnosis, and theory. He concerned himself with the why of disease, the complex dance of the four humors. He diagnosed, he prescribed, but he did not perform manual labor. At the bottom of the hierarchy was the barber-surgeon like Elric. He was a craftsman, a man of the hands. His domain was the external, the practical, the how. He dealt with the messy reality of wounds, fractures and boils. He was the one who cut, stitched, and bled. The physician was the architect, the surgeon was the builder, and the architect rarely respected the builder, even though he depended on him entirely. This academic snobbery is a recurring theme in medical history. Physicians wrote scathingly about the ignorance of surgeons, whom they often called mechanics or empirics, meaning they relied on experience rather than theory. Surgeons, in turn, often harbored a quiet resentment for the physicians, seeing them as pompous theorists who wouldn't know a compound fracture from a hole in the ground. The truth, as historians point out, is that they were to have a hole, and the best patient outcomes often occurred when a skilled surgeon and a wise physician could work together, despite the social chasm between them. A quirky but telling detail of this divide was the issue of beards. In many universities, a physician was required to be clean-shaven as a sign of his scholarly, almost clerical status. Surgeons, on the other hand, often wore beards. It was a small, visual cue that immediately distinguished one from the other. Elric performs the bloodletting with his usual quiet efficiency. He takes the prescribed amount of blood, bandages the lady's arm, and bows respectfully to the physician. The physician gives a curt nod of dismissal. As you walk back to your part of town, you can feel Elric's simmering frustration. He has not been consulted, he has been ordered. He was not a colleague, he was a tool. The incident clarifies your own position in this world. The path you are on, the path of the surgeon, is a path of immense skill and practical importance. You will save lids with your hands, but you will likely never wear a fur-trimmed robe or be called doctor. You're a craftsman, not a scholar. Your knowledge will come from the texture of bone and the color of blood, not from ancient books in a dusty library. You look at Elric's hands, strong, calloused, and capable. They may be the hands of a mechanic, but you've seen them perform work that felt closer to magic than any Euron gazing you witnessed today. You realize that respect is not always tied to social status. There is a deep, profound dignity in the craft itself, in the messy, hands-on, vital work of mending the human body. The world of medicine you inhabit is overwhelmingly male. The physicians, the surgeons, the apothecaries, they are all men. The official structures, the guilds, and the universities are built by and for men. Yet, you are constantly aware of another, parallel world of healing, one that operates largely in the homes and hearths of the city, a world run by women. This realization comes into focus when a heavily pregnant woman, the wife of a baker, comes to the shop. She is not there for a surgical issue, but for a consultation of a different kind. Her time is near, and she is afraid. Her last birth was difficult, and she wants Master Elric's opinion on what to do. Elric listens patiently, but he shakes his head. "This is not my domain," he says, his voice softer than usual. "Childbirth is the work of women. You must trust in your midwife." He gives her a simple herbal tonic to strengthen her constitution and sends her on her way with words of reassurance. After she leaves, you ask him why he, a surgeon who can set bones and open skulls, would not handle a birth. He explains that it is a matter of both custom and knowledge. Childbirth was considered a natural, domestic event, not a medical one. It was the exclusive province of women, a secret world of female knowledge and support that men were not privy to. The birthing room was a woman's space, attended by her female relatives, neighbors, and most importantly, the midwife. The midwife was one of the most important figures in the community. Like the bone setters, her knowledge was not from books, but was passed down through generations of experience. She knew how to time contractions, how to turn a baby in the womb, and how to manage the 100 small complications that could arise during labor. She was an expert in herbal remedies to ease pain or speed up delivery. Her hands had brought most of the city's inhabitants into the world, but her role was fraught with peril and suspicion. If a birth went well, the credit went to God and the mother. If a birth went badly, if the mother or child died, the blame often fell squarely on the midwife. In an age that believed in witchcraft, a midwife's intimate knowledge of the female body, her use of herbal remedies, and her presence at the raw, primal moment of birth made her a target. A midwife who lost too many mothers or babies could easily find herself accused of witchcraft, of having used her knowledge for malevolent purposes. The historical relationship between the male-dominated medical establishment and female healers is a complex and often tragic story. While many surgeons and physicians respected the practical skills of midwives, there was also a growing movement, particularly in the later Middle Ages and into the early Middle Ages and into the early modern period, to regulate and control them. Some cities required midwives to be licensed by male physicians, who would test their knowledge and their moral character. This was often framed as a way to protect women from incompetent practitioners, but many historians argue it was also an attempt by the male medical profession to assert control over a domain they had long been excluded from. This leads to a fascinating and slightly bizarre corner of medical history: the obstetrical forceps. While rudimentary forms may have existed earlier, the forceps as an effective tool for assisting in difficult births were developed and, for a time, kept as a lucrative family secret by the Chamberlain family in England during the 17th century. They would arrive at a birth with a large, mysterious box, send the women out of the room, and deliver the baby in secret, preserving the mystique and value of their invention. This secrecy highlights the tension childbirth was shifting from a woman-led natural event to a man-led medical procedure with technology as the key. Back in your world, the role of women in healthcare extends beyond the birthing room. Nearly every household was presided over by a woman who was, in effect, the family's primary care physician. She was the one who tended to the children's fevers, the husband's coughs, and the servants' cuts and scrapes. Her knowledge of kitchen garden herbs, lavender for headaches, thyme for a cough, chamomile for a restless night was extensive. This kitchen physic, as it was sometimes called, was the first line of defense against illness for the vast majority of the population. You see it every day. People come to Elric for the serious things, the broken bones and deep wounds, but for the daily aches and pains, they rely on the wisdom of their mothers, wives, and grandmothers. These women were the silent, unaccompanied bedrock of the medieval healthcare system. Their knowledge was vast, practical, and essential, yet it was rarely written down or formally recognized. A few weeks later, you hear that the baker's wife gave birth to a healthy son. The midwife, a woman named Agnes, successfully managed what could have been a difficult birth. The whole neighborhood celebrates. You see Agnes in the market a few days later, and she gives you a knowing nod. It's a moment of silent cross-professional respect. She, like Elric, is a guardian of life, working in a different but equally vital sphere. You realize that the story of healing is not a single narrative, but a chorus of many voices. And for centuries, the most numerous and necessary voices in that chorus belong to women, even if history has often forgotten to record their names. The human body is your textbook. You have learned its landscape through the geography of its wounds, the mechanics of its bones, and the feel of its flesh. But what you know is all external. The inner workings, the mysterious realm of the organs, remain a complete abstraction, a theoretical map based on the ancient writings of Galen. You have never, ever seen what the inside of a human body truly looks like. This is because, for the most part, the practice of human dissection is forbidden. Not necessarily by law, but by a powerful combination of social taboo and religious reverence for the dead. The body was seen as a sacred vessel, created in God's image, which would be resurrected on Judgment Day. To deliberately mutilate a corpse for study was seen by many as a profound act of desecration. However, the wall of this prohibition is beginning to crack. Whispers are coming from the great universities in Italy, in places like Bologna and Padua. Whispers of professors performing public dissections for their medical students, peeling back the layers of the human form to reveal its true structure. One day, Master Elric receives a discreet message. A convicted murderer has been executed by the city authorities. His body, as part of his punishment, has been denied a Christian burial and has instead been turned over to the small community of physicians and surgeons for a public anatomy. It's a rare and controversial event, and Elric has been granted permission to attend and to bring his apprentice. You go not to a church or a lecture hall, but to a cold stone cellar, hastily converted for the purpose. The air is thick with the smell of unslaked lime and something else, a cloying, sweetish odor you've never encountered before. In the center of the room, on a crude wooden table, lies the body of the executed man. A small, select group of physicians, surgeons, and their apprentices are gathered around, their faces a mixture of scholarly curiosity and morbid fascination. Presiding over the event is a visiting physician, a man who has witnessed the Anatomies in Italy. He stands at a lectern, reading aloud from a classical text by Galen, describing what the observers should be seeing. He does not touch the body himself. That undignified, bloody work is left to a hired assistant, a prosector, who is often a surgeon. Today, however, that assistant is Master Elric. Elric, his face set in a mask of professional concentration, makes the first cut, a long incision from the breastbone to the navel. He peels back the skin and muscle, revealing the ribcage, abdominal cavity. A collective gasp, a shuffling of feet, ripples through the small audience. You stare, utterly mesmerized. This is the first time you have seen the hidden world beneath the skin. The physician drones on from his text, describing the liver, the stomach, the intestines. Elric, following his instructions, points to a lifts each organ. But you notice something. What Elric is revealing does not always match what the physician is reading. Galen, the ancient authority, had based most of his anatomical work on the dissection of apes and pigs, not humans. He had, for example, described the human liver as having 5 lobes, like a dog's, but the liver Elric reveals in the corpse clearly has only 2 main lobes. This creates a palpable tension in the room. The physician, faced with a direct contradiction between the sacred text and the evidence of his own eyes, has a choice. Does he question the 1300-year-old authority of Galen, or does he question the validity of the body in front of him? In most cases, the choice was clear: the book was right. The physician might declare that this particular corpse was an anomaly, a freak of nature, or that the human body had simply changed since Galen's time. The power of the written word was often stronger than the power of direct observation. This conflict between textual authority and empirical evidence is a central theme in the history of science. The historical relationship between the church and dissection is a subject of much debate and is often misunderstood. The popular idea that the church issued a blanket ban on all human dissection is largely a myth. Popularized in the 19th century, there was no single universal prohibition. A papal bull issued by Pope Boniface VI in 1300, De Sepultura, which forbade the practice of boiling the bones of crusaders who died in the Holy Land to ship them home for burial, was later misinterpreted as a ban on dissection. In reality, the church's stance was ambiguous and varied by location and time. They were primarily concerned with the respectful treatment of the dead. As long as the dissection was for a legitimate medical purpose and the remains were given a proper burial afterward, some religious authorities were willing to look the other way, or even grant permission, as they did for this event. A weirdly specific offshoot of this was the saintly autopsy. When a person of great piety died, their body was sometimes dissected by physicians, not for general anatomical knowledge, but to search for physical signs of their holiness. They would look for an unusually large heart, strange cross-shaped markings on their organs, or even gallstones that could be preserved as holy relics. It was dissection as a form of sacred inquiry. As the anatomy lesson continues, you feel a profound shift in your understanding. You are seeing, for the first time, the elegant, complex, and messy reality of the human interior. The organs are not just abstract concepts from a chart, they are real, physical things with weight, texture, and a specific place in the intricate web of the body. The demonstration ends after a few hours. The body is sewn up to be buried in an unmarked grave. You and Elric walk home in the fading light. He is quiet, lost in thought. The experience has clearly affected him as well. For years, he has been mending the outside of the body. Today, he has held its very core in his hands. The image of the wounded man flickers in your mind. He is a creature of the surface, a map of external trauma. But today you have glimpsed a new map, an internal one, far more complex and mysterious. The whispers from Italy are growing louder. A new age of medicine is dawning, one that will be built not just on ancient texts, but on the willingness to look with one's own eyes into the very heart of the human machine. Your surgical training has focused on the individual, a single broken bone, a single deep wound, but as you walk through the city each day, you become increasingly aware of a different kind of sickness, one that afflicts not just one person, but the community itself. It's the sickness of the city. The streets, as you know, are filthy. Garbage and waste are a constant presence. The water from the river, where people dump their refuse, is also what many people drink. This lack of sanitation creates a perfect breeding ground for diseases that spread from person to person, sickening dozens at a time. Dysentery, typhoid, and influenza are regular, unwelcome visitors to the city, sweeping through neighborhoods and leaving weakness and death in their wake. But there is one disease that is feared above all others, a disease that doesn't just sicken the body, but also casts the sufferer out from society entirely. This is leprosy. One day, a man comes to the shop. He is not there for a wound, but for an opinion. He is a baker, and he has developed a strange, discolored patch of skin on his arm that has lost all feeling. He is terrified. He knows what it might be. Master Elric examines the patch, his face grim. He tests the skin with a needle. The man does not flinch. He cannot feel it. Elric cannot make the official diagnosis. That power does not lie with the surgeon. The man must present himself to a special panel, usually composed of a priest and a senior physician, who will examine him and pass judgment. But Elric knows what they will find. He tells the man, gently, to put his affairs in order. A few weeks later, the verdict is delivered. The man has leprosy. What happens next is a chilling ritual of social death. A special mass is held in the church. The man is made to stand in a roped-off section, as if he were already a ghost. The priest recites the rites for the dead over him, symbolically burying him from the world of the living. He is declared legally dead. His property is passed to his heirs, his marriage dissolved. He is then given a special set of clothes, a grey or black, hooded cloak and a wooden clapper or a bell. He is exiled from the city forever. He must live out his days in a leper house or leprosarium, outside the city walls, or wander the roads, ringing his bell to warn others of his approach, begging for charity. This is how medieval society dealt with its most feared chronic, contagious disease. It was a form of brutal, but effective quarantine. They didn't understand the bacillus that caused the illness now known as Hansen's disease, but they understood that it spread through close contact. By isolating the afflicted, they protected the larger community. The leprosaria were a strange feature of the medieval landscape. They were part hospital, part monastery, part prison. Run by religious orders, they provided food and shelter for the outcasts, who were expected to live a life of prayer and penance. The disease was often seen as a divine punishment for sin, particularly the sin of lust, and so the leper's life was one of atonement. The historical debate around medieval leprosy is fascinating. Some historians and paleopathologists now argue that many of the people confined to leper houses may not have leprosy at all. The diagnosis was often based on a vague collection of symptoms: skin lesions, facial deformities, numbness. These symptoms could also be caused by other conditions like psoriasis, eczema, or tuberculosis of the skin. It's possible that countless people were exiled for life based on a misdiagnosis. Imagine being cast out from your family and home, forced to live as an outcast, all because of a severe skin rash. A particularly weird aspect of this was the leper's squint. Because the disease often attacked the nerves of the face, it could cause deformities under strange, fixed stare. This became one of the key visual identifiers for a leper, to the point where healthy people would sometimes mimic it to scare others or as a cruel joke. As a surgeon, your role in this public health drama is minimal. You might be called upon to treat the secondary injuries or ailments of a leper. They were still human and could still break a bone, but you could not cure their primary condition. The city itself, not the surgeon, was the doctor in this case, and its prescription was a bitter pill: total, permanent isolation. You see the baker one last time. He is standing on a distant hill, looking back at the city that was once his home. He is a small, lonely figure in a grey cloak. He raises his hand, not in a wave, but to ring his small, desolate bell. The sound carries faintly on the wind, a mournful little clack, clack that signals his approach and his eternal separation. The sight fills you with a sense of helplessness. Your skills, your knowledge of the wound man, they are all useless against a sickness like this. This is not a clean wound you can stitch, or a broken bone you can set, or a broken bone you can set. This is a slow, creeping decay that dissolves a person's body and their place in the world. It's a stark reminder that there are forces of nature and disease far greater than any one surgeon's ability to heal. The slow, creeping fear of leprosy has been a constant background hum in your life. But one summer, a new fear arrives. It comes not as a slow decay, but as a swift, invisible storm. It begins with rumors from the south, tales brought by sailors and traveling merchants. They speak of a great sickness in the port cities of Italy, a pestilence so swift and deadly that it leaves entire towns silent in its wake. At first, the stories are just that, stories, distant and unreal. But then the fear begins to travel faster than the disease itself. People in your city start looking at strangers with suspicion. The price of herbs and spices with supposed protective qualities begins to climb. A nervous, electric tension settles over the once familiar streets. And then it arrives. It starts with the dockworkers. One day, a man complains of a sudden high fever and chills. The next day, he is dead. A few days later, his entire family is gone. The sickness is marked by terrifying symptoms: a raging fever, vomiting, and most distinctively, the appearance of swollen, painful lumps in the armpits, groin, and neck. They call them buboes. They are dark, purplish, and hard as stones. This is the Black Death. Panic erupts. The city, which once seemed so robust and eternal, begins to disintegrate. The social order dissolves. People abandon their homes, their jobs, their sick family members. The rich flee to their country estates, often carrying the disease with them. The streets, once bustling with life, become eerily quiet, punctuated only by the rumble of the death carts making their grim rounds. Your world, the world of medicine, is thrown into utter chaos. Everything you have learned is useless against this onslaught. Master Elric works day and night, but he is helpless. He can offer cooling draughts for the fever and pain-relieving tinctures, but he cannot stop the disease's relentless march. The theory of the four humors, which once seemed so elegant and all-encompassing, provides no answers. Is this an excess of black by late corruption of the blood? No one knows. The physicians are equally powerless. They debate the cause. Is it a miasma, a cloud of poisonous air released by an earthquake, or an unfortunate alignment of the planets? Many believe so. This leads to one of the most iconic and strange figures of the era, the Plague Doctor. While more common in the later plagues of the 17th century, the early versions of their protective costume appear during this time. A physician might wear a long, waxed coat, gloves, and most famously, a mask with a long, bird-like beak. This beak wasn't just for dramatic effect, it was packed with aromatic herbs, spices, and straw. The idea was that these sweet-smelling substances would filter out the poisonous miasma before it could be inhaled. It's a fascinating piece of proto-gas mask technology, based on a completely wrong theory of disease transmission. We now know the plague was primarily spread by fleas from infected rats, but the miasma theory would dominate medical thinking for centuries. The historical debate here centers on the mortality rate. For centuries, it was accepted that the Black Death killed a third to a half of Europe's population. Some recent studies have challenged this, suggesting the death toll might have been even higher in some areas, perhaps up to 60%, while other regions were less affected. The sheer scale of the death is almost impossible for us to comprehend. It was a demographic catastrophe that fundamentally reshaped European society for generations. In the face of medicine's failure, people turned to desperate measures. Some engage in fervent public prayer, whipping themselves in processions as penance to appease a wrathful god. Others turn to hedonism, living for the moment in a frenzy of drinking and feasting, believing their days are numbered. And many look for scapegoats. In several cities across Europe, fear and paranoia curdle into violence against Jewish communities. who are falsely accused of poisoning the wells and deliberately spreading the disease. One day, Master Elric is called to the home of a wealthy merchant. The entire household is sick, as he prepares a poultice to soothe the painful buboes of the merchant's son. The young man dies, his body convulsing in a final, agonizing spasm. Elric returns to the shop, his face a mask of defeat you have never seen before. He washes his hands, not with his usual brisk efficiency, but slowly, warily. "I can do nothing," he says, his voice hollow. He quarantines himself in the shop, refusing to see more plague patients, not out of cowardice, but out of a sense of futility and a desire to protect you. You spend the days in the quiet, empty shop, listening to the death bells toll endlessly outside. The wound man chart, rolled up in its corner, seems like a relic from a different, more innocent age. All his collected injuries, the sword thrusts, the arrow wounds, the broken bones, seem manageable, almost trivial, compared to this invisible enemy that can fell a healthy man in a single day. The plague finally burns itself out as winter arrives, leaving your city a hollowed-out shell of its former self. A third of the people you knew are gone. The social landscape is changed forever. Labor is scarce, so peasants and craftsmen can demand higher wages. The old feudal order is shaken to its core. You and Dalric have survived, but something has broken. The old certainties are gone. The medical framework you spent years learning has been proven utterly inadequate. The world feels fragile, uncertain, and profoundly more dangerous than before. The Black Death has been a brutal, terrifying lesson, teaching you the true limits of your craft and the horrifying power of a disease that no surgeon's knife can cut away. The years after the Great Pestilence are strange and unsettled. The world has been hollowed out, but life, resilient and stubborn, floods back into the empty spaces. There is a new energy in the air, a sense of frenetic change, and with it, new ideas are taking root, challenging the old ways of thinking that proved so useless against the plague. These whispers of change are strongest from the south, from Italy. They call it a renaissance, a rebirth of art, philosophy, and science. At first, it feels very distant from your world of practical surgery. What do paintings and sculptures have to do with setting bones? But then, the new ideas begin to filter into your own field, and they arrive in a form you understand intimately. A picture. One day, a traveling scholar, an old acquaintance of Master Elric's, visits the shop. He has just returned from a trip to Padua and Venice. He carries with him a leather portfolio, and from it, he pulls something that makes you catch your breath. It is a printed page from a book, an anatomical illustration, but it is unlike anything you have ever seen. It is not a crude, symbolic drawing like your wound man. This is an image of breathtaking realism and detail. It shows the muscles of a human arm and shoulder, each one perfectly rendered with texture, shadow, and a sense of dynamic tension. The figure is not standing passively like the wound man. He is posed like a classical statue, a figure of beauty and power. The artist has clearly seen, with his own eyes, the structures beneath the skin. The scholar tells you about a man named Andreas Vesalius, a young, brilliant, and famously arrogant anatomist at the University of Padua. Vesalius is performing his own dissections, not relying on a prosector while he reads from Galen. He is a hands-on anatomist, exploring the human body himself and trusting the evidence of his own eyes over the 1,000-year-old texts. And he is working with the finest art as a book. The result is a book, De Human Corporis Fabricae, on the fabric of the human body, that is poised to revolutionize medicine. You hold the printed page in your hands. It feels like a dispatch from the future. The scholar explains that Vesalius' work confirms many of the discrepancies you witnessed in the cellar all those years ago. Vesalius shows definitively that the human jawbone is a single bone, not two as Galen had claimed. He shows the correct structure of the heart and the liver. He is systematically dismantling the authority of the ancient texts, not through argument, but through the undeniable power of direct observation and vivid illustration. This new anatomy is more than just a scientific advancement. It represents a profound philosophical shift. The medieval view, as embodied by the wound man, saw the body as a fragile, passive recipient of injury. It was a map of potential destruction. The new vessel Yon view sees the body as a marvel of divine engineering, a complex, beautiful machine. It celebrates the body's structure and function. The historical debate here concerns the vessel Yon revolution. Was Vesalius a lone genius who single-handedly overthrew Galenic anatomy, or was he the culmination of a longer trend of increasing interest in dissection that had been building for over a century? The consensus among historians is that while Vesalius was a pivotal and brilliant figure, he was building on the work of his predecessors. His true genius lay in his systematic approach, his insistence on hands-on dissection, and his revolutionary use of high-quality illustrations to disseminate his findings. The printing press, a relatively new technology, was his superpower, allowing his beautifully illustrated work to be reproduced and spread across Europe with unprecedented speed. A weird, but telling detail about Vesalius's famous book is the background of the illustrations. The anatomical figures, the so-called muscle men, are not posed in a sterile laboratory. They are set against the backdrop of the rolling Euganeian hills near Padua. It's a surreal and beautiful choice, blending the clinical study of the dead with the vibrant landscape of the living. It reinforces the idea that this is not just a book about corpses, it's a book about the human body as a part of the natural world. Master Elric stares at the illustration for a long time. His face a mixture of awe and something you can't quite read, perhaps melancholy. He unrolls his old, faithful wound man chart and lays it on the table next to the vessel Yon print. The contrast is staggering. The wound man is a flat, two-dimensional symbol, the collection of calamities. The vessel Yon figure is a three-dimensional reality, a celebration of form and function. This, Elric says, tapping the vessel Yon print, is a new world. He looks at the wound man, his expression softening. And our old friend here, he is from the old one. You realize in that moment that the wound man's days are numbered. He is a product of a world that viewed the body from the outside in, as a list of potential disasters. The new age of medicine will view the body from the inside out as a complex and knowable system. The surgeon's map is being redrawn, and the new atlas will be one of breathtaking, and sometimes terrifying clarity. The age of symbols is ending, and the age of direct sight is beginning. The beautifully rendered anatomical prints of Vesalius are just the beginning. They are a map, but a map is useless without a traveler willing to use it to explore new territory. The new anatomy needs a new kind of surgeon. And soon you begin to hear stories of just such a man, a French surgeon whose name is spoken with a mixture of reverence and controversy. Ambroise Père. Pére's story sounds more like a legend than a biography. He did not begin as a university-trained physician. Like you and Elric, he started his career as a humble barber-surgeon. He learned his trade not in a lecture hall, but on the brutal battlefields of the Franco-Italian Wars. It was there, surrounded by the carnage of gunshot wounds, a new and terrifying type of injury, that he made the discoveries that would change surgery forever. The first story you hear is about his gentle wound treatment. The standard practice for treating a gunshot wound was, as you know, horrifically brutal. Because gunpowder was believed to be poisonous, the treatment was to cleanse the wound by pouring boiling oil into it. It was an agonizing procedure that caused immense tissue damage and often did more harm than good. The story goes that during one particularly bloody battle, Père ran out of oil. Forced to improvise, he created a simple, soothing digestive, or ointment, made of egg yolk, rose oil, and turpentine. He applied it to the remaining wounds, deeply anxious that he had failed his patients. He spent a sleepless night, expecting to find them dead or dying from the poison of the gunshot. To his astonishment, the next morning he found that the soldiers treated with his gentle ointment were resting comfortably, their wounds calm and inflamed, while those who had been treated with the boiling oil were feverish and in agony. Père famously wrote, "I found them better than the others. And I determined with myself never so cruelly to burn poor men wounded with gunshot." This moment is often cited as a turning point in surgical history, the shift from aggressive, destructive treatments to gentler, more supportive ones. He had dared to trust his own eyes and experience over the established dogma. The second, and perhaps even more revolutionary, story is about his revival of the ligature. As you know from watching Elric, The standard way to control bleeding during an amputation was the red-hot cautery iron. It was quick, it was effective, but it was also incredibly destructive and left a charred, painful stump that was difficult to fit with a prosthesis. Of course, this innovation was not without its critics. The old guard of surgeons, fiercely loyal to the cautery, attacked Pear relentlessly. They argued that ligatures were too slow, that they could slip, causing the patient to bleed to death, and that by leaving a foreign body the thread in the wound, they would encourage putrefaction. The debate between cauterizers and ligatures tests raged for decades. Historians still discuss the reasons for this resistance. Was it simple conservatism, a reluctance to abandon a trusted method, or were there legitimate concerns, in a pre-sterile age, that ligatures genuinely increased the risk of the deadly secondary infections that they called hospital gangrene? One of Pear's most famous and charming quotes, which you hear repeated by the scholar who tells you his stories, perfectly sums up his humble yet revolutionary philosophy. After describing a successful treatment, he would often write, "Dieu pansei, Dieu le guérit the wound." God healed him. It's a beautiful expression of the surgeon's role as skilled facilitator of the body's own God-given ability to heal. A more quirky and less famous contribution of Pear's was his work in prosthetics and artificial eyes. He had a deep sympathy for the wounded soldiers he treated and designed incredibly ingenious artificial limbs with complex joints and locking mechanisms. He even designed artificial eyes made from enameled gold or silver, which, while they couldn't restore sight, could provide a more pleasing appearance for a nobleman who had lost an eye in battle, but for the quality of that life afterward. The stories about Pear are like a fresh breeze blowing through the stale, smoky air of your surgical world. He is not a long-robed physician looking down on the craft. He is one of you, a barber-surgeon who, through genius, courage, and compassion, is elevating the trade to a new level of art and science. He is the living embodiment of the Renaissance spirit, a man who respects the knowledge of the past but is not enslaved by it. You and Delric talk about him long into the night. Pear's work feels like a validation of everything Elric has ever taught you about careful observation and putting the patient's well-being first. But it's also a challenge. It's a call to abandon the old cruel certainties like the cautery iron and to embrace a new, gentler, more anatomical approach to healing. The Weird Man represents a world where the surgeon's primary role is to fight back against a brutal injury with an equally brutal treatment. Pear's world is one where the surgeon's role is to work with the body, to gently guide it back to wholeness. It's a new philosophy, and it will require a new kind of courage. Years have passed. Master Elric's hair is now more silver than grey, and his hands, though still steady, have lost some of their raw power. You are no longer the wide-eyed apprentice. You are a surgeon in your own right, a partner in the practice. You have performed your own reductions, stitched your own wounds, and even, on one terrifying occasion, performed a successful trepanation on a young boy who fell from a horse. The shop is now as much yours as it is his. One quiet winter afternoon, as the light begins to fail, you find yourself rummaging through the old wooden chest in the corner, looking for a particular type of bandage. Your hand brushes against the familiar smooth, cool surface of the vellum roll. On an impulse, you pull it out. It has been years since you last looked at it. You carefully unroll the wound man chart on the table. The stoic, mutilated figure stares back at you, a ghost from your own past. But you are not the same person who first laid eyes on this image. You see it now not with the fearful awe of an apprentice, but with the experienced, critical, and somewhat weary eyes of a seasoned practitioner. And the image transforms before you. You no longer see just a catalogue of horrors. You see a lifetime of work. Your eyes trace the injuries, and each one sparks a memory, a face, a story. The dagger in the shoulder that's the young city guardsman Thomas from all those years ago. You remember the smell of the cautery iron, the sight of the laudable pus that you once found so revolting and now understand as a misguided but deeply held belief. You recall the new, gentler methods Pear advocated, and wonder how differently you would treat that wound today, perhaps with a clean suture and a simple wine-soaked dressing. The arrow in the knee that's the blacksmith's apprentice. You can still feel the weight of his leg in your hands, the sickening pop as Elric seated the bone after snipping the barbs. It was your first taste of real, hands-on surgery. You now know 10 different types of arrowheads and the specific tools designed to extract each one. You see not just an injury, but a complex mechanical problem with multiple solutions. The club to the head, the stone missing. The grating sound of the trepan still echoes in your memory. You look at the wound on the chart and you understand, in a way you couldn't then, the delicate anatomy that lies just millimeters beneath the bone, the fragile membrane of the dura mater, the network of blood vessels that can bring life or death. You've seen Vesalius' detailed maps of the skull, and the wound man's crude depiction seems almost childish in comparison, yet it still conveys the fundamental terror of a head injury. The broken leg, the old farmer. You recall the feel of the bones grinding under Elric's hands, the smell of the egg white cast as it dried. And you think of old Meg, the bone setter, and the whole world of folk healing that operated alongside your own. You see the fracture not just as a medical case, but as a point of intersection between formal and informal medicine, a reminder that the path to healing has many routes. The snake on the ankle, you remember the tanner with the dog bite, the aggressive cauterization, the belief in specific venoms. Now you're more skeptical. You've seen too many people recover from bites with simple cleaning, and too many die despite the most aggressive treatments. You've come to believe that the constitution of the patient and simple luck play a far greater role than any specific antivenom poultice. The wound man, you realize, is not just a diagram of injuries. It's a profound statement about particular worldview. It represents a top-down approach to medicine. It shows a static, complete catalogue of all possible traumas with a corresponding, pre-approved treatment for each one, handed down by the authorities of the past. It's a finite list of problems with a finite list of answers. The world you now inhabit, the world of Vesalius and Pear, is different. It's a bottom-up world. It starts not with the text, but with the body itself. It demands that you look, touch, and explore. It acknowledges that every body is different, every injury unique. It replaces the old, rigid certainty with a new, more dynamic, and far more demanding uncertainty. The question is no longer what does the book say about this wound, but what does this specific patient tell me? This shift in perspective is still a matter of intense study for historians of science. When did medicine truly become modern? Was it with Vesalius' anatomy, with Pear's gentle surgery, or later, with the discovery of germs? The argument continues, but you, standing in your shop, feel that the change is more fundamental. It's the moment a practitioner stops seeing the patient as an example of an injury on a chart, and starts seeing the chart as a crude, outdated representation of the patient. You look at the wound man's passive, enduring face. You once saw it as stoic. Now it just looks resigned. He is a man to whom things happen. He is a victim. The new medicine, you feel, is about creating patients who are not just victims, but active participants in their own complex, biological story. With a sigh, you gently roll the vellum chart back up. It is no longer your primary reference. It has become something else, a historical document, a memento of your own journey, a silent teacher whose lessons are now complete. You slide it back into the chest, a relic of a dying age. As you transition from being Elric's apprentice to his successor, you find yourself reflecting more on the why of your craft. You've seen the monumental failures, the inability to stop the plague, the misguided faith in laudable pus, the brutal necessity of the cautery iron. It's easy to look back on the medicine of your youth as a dark age of ignorance and butchery. But as you treat your own patients, applying the newer, gentler methods, a surprising and humbling thought occurs to you: some of the old ways actually worked, even if the reasons they worked were completely misunderstood. You are treating a young woman for a persistent, ugly ulcer on her leg that refuses to heal. Remembering a trick from your early apprenticeship, you decide to try a traditional remedy. You apply a poultice made of honey and clean, scraped lint from a linen cloth. You also have her eat plenty of citrus fruits, which have become more available from traders, a dietary suggestion for scurvy-like conditions. Within a few weeks, the ulcer heals beautifully. You reflect on this. The old theory would have been that the honey, being a warm and moist substance, helped to balance the cold and dry nature of the ulcer. The real reason, as you are beginning to intuit from newer writings, is likely different. Honey, you've noticed, seems to prevent wounds from putrefying. It creates a clean, protected environment for healing. You don't know the words antibacterial or osmotic effect, but you are observing the result. The lint helps to absorb excess fluid, and the citrus fruits are correcting a vitamin C deficiency that was impairing her body's ability to produce collagen and heal itself. The treatment was effective, but the explanation was pure fiction. This is a recurring theme you start to notice. So many of the old remedies were cases of getting it right for the wrong reasons. Consider bloodletting. For centuries it was the go-to treatment for almost everything, based on the flawed theory of the humus. It undoubtedly killed countless patients who were already weakened by illness. But were there times it actually worked? You think of the ruddy-faced merchant with the pounding headache. The bloodletting would have lowered his blood pressure, likely providing immediate temporary relief from what might have been hypertensive crisis. For a patient with congestive heart failure, a condition where fluid builds up in the lungs or moist humoral imbalance, removing a pint of blood would have temporarily reduced the volume load on the heart, making it easier for them to breathe. The treatment in these specific cases addressed the symptoms, but for reasons that had nothing to do with balancing humus. Or take the willow bark tincture Elric gave the farmer with the broken leg. The theory was that it had cooling properties to fight the heat of the inflammation. The reality, as we now know, is that willow bark contains sol-lysine, a natural anti-inflammatory and pain reliever chemically related to aspirin. It was effective pharmacology disguised as humoral theory. This phenomenon is a source of endless fascination for medical historians. They debate the extent to which these happy accidents contributed to the longevity of flawed theories. If a treatment appears to work, it reinforces the theory behind it, even if the theory is completely wrong. This creates a powerful confirmation bias that can keep a medical system locked in place for centuries. You even come across a truly bizarre case that makes you question everything. You read a report from another surgeon about the use of mummy powder to treat severe bruising. This was a real and ghoulishly popular remedy, where the ground-up remains of ancient Egyptian mummies were made into a paste. The theory was that the bitumen and resins used in mummification had powerful healing properties. Of course, this was pure magical thinking. But the report noted that in some cases, the deep bruising did seem to resolve faster. A modern explanation: the bitumen in the mummy wrappings is a source of natural asphalt, which has anti-inflammatory properties. It was a disgusting, nonsensical, yet occasionally effective treatment. You start to see the history of your craft not as a simple line from ignorance to enlightenment, but as a tangled, messy web of ideas. Correct observations were often attached to wildly incorrect theories. Effective practices were justified by magical thinking. Ineffective and dangerous treatments were defended with elegant, internally consistent logic. This new perspective gives you a certain humility. You practice the new surgery of pair, using ligatures and clean dressings. You study the new anatomy of Vesalius. You feel you are on the cutting edge of medicine. But you have to wonder how many of the things you believe to be true right now will seem just as misguided to a surgeon 100 years from now. Are you still, in some ways, getting it right for the wrong reasons? This realization doesn't diminish your confidence, but it tempers it. It connects you to your past, to Master Elric, and to the long line of surgeons before him. You are all part of the same struggle. You are all trying to push back against pain and death with the best tools and theories you have available. You see now that even in its most ignorant phases, your profession was never static. It was always observing, always trying, and sometimes, through a combination of luck, intuition, and coincidence, it stumbled upon a little piece of the truth. The years spool out, measured in the changing seasons and the steady rhythm of patients coming and going. The shop, once Master Elric's domain, is now entirely yours. Elric himself has retired, a content old man who sits by the fire, reading the new printed books and offering quiet advice when you ask for it. You have your own apprentice now, a sharp young lad who looks at you with the same mixture of fear and admiration that you once held for Elric. You are the master now. Your hands, once soft, are now the calloused, capable hands of a surgeon. Your hair is showing its first threads of silver. You have become a respected figure in the city, the man people turn to when steel meets flesh or bone meets stone. One evening after a long day that involved setting a collarbone and stitching a deep cut on a butcher's arm, you find yourself sitting alone in the quiet shop. The last rays of the setting sun slant through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Your gaze falls upon the old wooden chest in the corner. You haven't opened it in years. You walk over and lift the heavy lid. The scent of old wood, dried herbs, and aged vellum rises to meet you. There, at the bottom, lies the roll. The wound man. You take it out, its surface cool and smooth against your skin, and carry it to the table. With a soft crackle, you unroll it one last time. The figure on the vellum seems ancient now, a relic from another world. The crude lines, the flat perspective, the catalogue of archaic weapons, it's all so foreign compared to the elegant, three-dimensional anatomical prints locked away in your cabinet. He is a testament to a time of superstition, of brutal certainty, of medicine practiced in the shadow of overwhelming violence. You look at his face. That stoic, unchanging expression that has stared out across the centuries. You have seen that look before. You saw it on the face of the blacksmith's apprentice as he bit down on the leather strap. You saw it on the stonemason as he braced for the trepan. You saw it on the guardsman as the cautery iron sizzled against his flesh. It is the look of human endurance in the face of unimaginable pain. It is the look of someone entrusting their fragile body to your hands, hoping for a miracle. The wound man, you realize, was never just a chart. He was never just a map of injuries. He was a symbol of the patient. He was every man, woman, and child who ever walked through your door, their bodily landscape of pain and fear, their hope placed entirely in your skill. He embodies the terrifying vulnerability at the heart of the human condition. And the weapons that pierce him, they are not just swords and daggers. They are symbols of everything the world can throw at a person. They are the falling stone, the runaway cart, the tainted water, the invisible pestilence. They are the thousand slings and arrows of a dangerous and unpredictable world. Your role, the role of the surgeon, was to stand against that onslaught. It was to pull the arrow, set the bone, and stitch the flesh. You were the designated repairman for the fragile human machine. Sometimes your tools were rude, sometimes your theories were flawed, sometimes your best efforts ended in failure, but you always stood your ground. You always tried. A profound sense of peace settles over you. You have lived through a revolution in your craft. You have seen the world of the cautery iron give way to the world of the ligature. You have seen the authority of ancient texts fall before the evidence of the anatomist's knife. You have been a bridge between the medieval and the modern. You think of Master Elric and of Ambra Wapere's humble, powerful words addressed the wound, God healed him. That, you decide, is the ultimate truth of your profession. It's a partnership. You do what you can with your hands and your knowledge, and then you step back and trust in the mysterious, resilient power of life itself to do the rest. With a final, lingering look at the old warrior on the page, you gently roll the vellum up for the last time. You do not put it back in the chest. You take it to the fireplace where a low fire still burns. For a moment you hesitate. This is your history, the first page of your life's story. But you know its time is over. Its lessons have been learned. You place the roll into the embers. It blackens, curls, and then, with a soft whoosh, catches fire. The flames consume the image, turning the swords and arrows, the stoic face and the wounded body, into nothing but light and heat, and a wisp of smoke rising up the chimney into the twilight. The age of the wound man is over. Yours is just beginning. The fire crackles softly, the last of the vellum turning to feathery grey ash. The story is over now, the shop is quiet, and the tools are all clean and put away. The city outside your window has fallen into the deep, quiet breathing of the night. You can almost feel the gentle weight of your own blanket, the cool touch of the pillow beneath your head. The journey you took was long, spanning a lifetime of change, but it is done. The sounds of that distant time, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the rumble of the death cart, the grating of the surgeon's saw, all of it fades away now. It recedes, becoming as soft and distant as a half-remembered dream. The faces of the people you met, the apprentice and the master, the patient and the priest, all blur and soften, their anxieties and triumphs dissolving into the peaceful darkness behind your eyes. You are fighting now, in that gentle space between wakefulness and sleep. There are no more wounds to mend, no more fevers to cool. There is only the rhythmic, steady beat of your own heart, a quiet drum in the stillness of your room. The air is calm. Your breathing is slow and deep. You are safe. You are warm. The end of the article. Good night.